Hey guys, tonight we drift to the sun-baked hills of Sicily, where the olive trees lean like old men with secrets, and the silence between footsteps says more than the words themselves. There's a breeze moving through Corleone, but it doesn't ruffle the curtains. It listens. Tonight, we follow a boy who grows into a ghost, a man who disappears into myths while pulling strings that stretch across oceans. They called him the Tractor, not because he was loud, but because once he started moving, he never stopped. You probably won't survive this version of Sicily, not because of bullets in the back, but because of the silence. It swallows you before you know you're gone. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're here, drop your city and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The town of Corleone in the 1930s isn't famous yet, not the way Hollywood would later make it. No theme music, no tuxedo dons, just farmland, the scent of sheep, stone paths, and a lot of people who keep their thoughts folded neatly behind their teeth. Among them, a wiry boy named Bernardo Provenzano scampers through the fields, his eyes two pinholes of suspicion. He's quiet, too quiet for a child. Even the crows seem unsure what to make of him. He helps his father mend fences, watches the men who never raise their voices, but always seem to be obeyed. There's something about how they hold their cigarettes. Not casual, but deliberate. Like every flick of ash signs a contract. Bernardo watches and learns. Even at school, teachers notice that he never asks questions. He listens, nods, and quietly gets everything right. One teacher would later recall, he didn't just absorb lessons. He stored them like secrets. By the time he's a teenager, the world outside Corleone is spiraling. Fascism grips Italy in a theatrical, clenched fist. But here, in the hills, life continues at a slower, deeper pulse. Benito Mussolini is far away, and the only law people truly respect comes with a handshake and a glance. The men Bernardo admires don't wear uniforms. They wear silence like armor. His friends, few as they are, start noticing things. When a neighbor goes missing after a feud, Bernardo doesn't ask questions. He just ties his shoelaces tighter and looks at the dirt. He's not afraid, but there's an awareness, as though his bones have already signed some quiet allegiance to this land and its unwritten rules. At age 16, Bernardo leaves school. His grades are good, but ambition pulls him elsewhere. Not to Rome, not to books, to the streets, to the dirt paths between farms, to the corners where old men whisper names and fold money into handkerchiefs. He's drawn not by glamour, but by precision, by control. Mainstream historians note this period, post-Mussolini and pre-American invasion, as a time when the mafia began reorganizing under the radar. Many bosses were exiled or imprisoned, but in Corleone, the next generation sharpened their teeth in silence. Bernardo was among them. He works jobs that don't exist on paper. Errands, messages, visits. His hands rarely dirty, yet the effect of his errands ripples through the valley. A goat herder suddenly gains land. A debtor vanishes overnight. A merchant begins handing out discounts, only to certain people. Provenzano's earliest mentor is local Capo Michele Navarra, a doctor who delivers babies by day and delivers orders by dusk. Bernardo never speaks out of turn around him, but Navarra notices the boy. He calls him Trattori, the Tractor. At first, it's a joke. Bernardo never stops moving, never complains, never argues. Later, the name sticks for darker reasons. The thing about tractors, they don't swerve, some locals begin to whisper. The boy with the sharp eyes, he's not just running errands anymore. He's watching people, counting who eats at which cafe, who talks to whom at church. And sometimes, days after a conversation Bernardo watches from afar, someone's fortunes change or end. At night, his mother notices he sleeps soundly. No nightmares, no teeth grinding, just calm, rhythmic breaths. She tells a friend, Bernardo could sleep through a storm. What she doesn't say is what she sees in his eyes when he wakes, something cool and unreadable, as if he's already planning 3 steps ahead. The Americans arrive in 1943, and Sicily becomes a chessboard. Operation Husky kicks off, bringing Allied boots to the island. Soldiers hand out chewing gum and leaflets, hoping to win hearts and minds. But they don't understand that Sicilian hearts are guarded by centuries of suspicion, and the minds, well, they belong to men like Provenzano now. Many people still think that the mafia's resurgence during the Allied invasion was orchestrated directly by U.S. officials in a backroom deal. Some say it was a desperate tactic. Others say it was calculated. So, what do you think? Did democracy shake hands with silence that summer? Regardless, as chaos brews in Palermo and the Allied forces fumble through cultural misunderstandings, Provenzano's local network solidifies. He doesn't shout. He doesn't drink. He simply moves, steadily, deliberately, like that same tractor plowing invisible furrows through the countryside. By 1945, he's in. Not at the top, not even close. But he's trusted. He knows where people live, who owes whom, and which priests look the other way. He writes nothing down. Everything he learns, he stores in his head. He's not flashy. That's for the American gangsters. Bernardo wears brown jackets, rides a bicycle, and speaks only when he must. But when he does speak, people stop fiddling with their espresso spoons. A neighbor once described him in a single sentence. He looked like a man who'd seen a lion and didn't blink. Even then, people understand. He's not the lion. He's the shadow that leads it to water. The Corleone countryside has its own rhythm, a mix of roosters at dawn, the soft hiss of olive oil in blackened pans, and the distant cracking of gunfire that no one mentions. By the late 1940s, Bernardo Provenzano blends into this setting like dust on a windowsill. Always there, never questioned. He doesn't need to speak to be noticed, and that's precisely why he is. He isn't a boss yet, far from it, but he's no errand boy either. The errands he runs now are quieter, but far more serious. One day, a rival merchant's shop mysteriously catches fire. Another time, a landowner changes his will just days before falling down a well. These things don't make headlines. They make whispers. And in Sicily, whispers write the real history. Provenzano's childhood friends begin to drop off. Some take jobs in Palermo. Others leave for Naples or Rome. A few don't leave at all, but are never seen again. Bernardo remains, anchored to Corleone, like a cypress tree. Rooted, silent, watching. He starts working closely with a man named Salvatore Riina, Toto, they call him. Riina is the opposite of Bernardo in many ways. Loud when needed, quick to temper, a flame to Bernardo's stone. But together, they begin to form a kind of harmony. Like a piano's low keys and high keys, their contrast creates something more formidable than either could alone. They begin operating under the wing of Dr. Navarra, the boss in Corleone at the time. Navarra believes in order, in hierarchy, in the delicate dance between favor and fear. Bernardo studies him closely, watches how he walks into a room with a smile and leaves with everyone a little more nervous. But Rina? He sees Navarra's structure as old world, outdated. And Provenzano, in his quiet way, sees both men clearly. One clings to tradition, the other wants to burn it down. The air grows tense. Mainstream accounts of this period note that young men like Rina and Provenzano represented a new kind of mafia, less ceremonial, more ruthless. Gone were the musty codes and blood oath formalities. In their place, action, efficiency, and brutality. One evening, the trio shares a meal: Navarra, Raina, and Provenzano. It's in a shaded vineyard outside town. The table is set simply, with bread, olives, and wine. No guards, no guns, just laughter and long pauses. Navarra toasts to loyalty. Rina grins and drinks. Provenzano doesn't toast. He just watches the rim of his glass. The silence between the three is louder than the laughter around them. Not long after, the shift begins. Rina and Provenzano start pulling their own strings. Discreet at first, protection rackets, small arms deals, local intimidation. But then, they make a move so bold it shakes Corleone's roots. They eliminate Navarra. No one sees it coming, except perhaps Provenzano, who helps coordinate the hit with his signature blend of invisibility and precision. No one ever confirms who pulled the trigger. But the doctor disappears, permanently. This marks the true beginning of what historians later call the Corleonese era, a period of fear, silence, and meticulous control. Do you remember the day he left with the first money? Just a few bills, slipped into his sock after a job well done. It wasn't greed, it was control. That same hunger for control now drives Provenzano deeper into the heart of Cosa Nostra. With Navarra gone, the Corleonese faction begins to grow, and Provenzano takes on a new role. He's not front and center. He never is. But he's there, always a few steps behind Rina, always watching, always calculating. Their strategy is simple: eliminate rivals, merge small factions under Corleone rule, punish dissent with absolute quiet. It's a campaign not just of violence, but of psychological dominance. A man would receive a note with a single word, attento, and leave town that same night, never to return. Bernardo oversees much of this without ever touching a gun. Instead, he uses what he calls systems, lists of names, routes, habits. He memorizes them all, and when it's time to act, he sends someone else to do it. A tractor doesn't swing a scythe, it just plows forward. Many people still think that Provenzano's true genius wasn't in killing, but in planning, that he saw criminal organization as a kind of architecture. Blueprints, stress points, foundations, exits. So what do you think? Can silence build an empire more effectively than speeches? In the 1950s, Italy itself begins to change. Post-war reconstruction brings new roads, new factories, and with them, new opportunities. Smuggling routes open up. Political parties look for discreet allies, and the Corleonesi expand. Provenzano becomes the go-to man for discretion. Need a shipment rerouted without questions? Ask Bernardo. Need a bribe delivered to a man who doesn't want to be seen? Bernardo knows a priest who knows a brother who knows a banker. Quiet, reliable, unseen. His fame, if you can call it that, is whispered among bosses. He gets it done. they say, and you won't hear a word. Once, a Palermo boss supposedly complained, "I don't trust a man who doesn't drink." That boss died of food poisoning the next week. There are no photographs of Bernardo from this time, no confirmed voice recordings. He is, for all intents and purposes, a rumor. And yet, his influence seeps into every decision, every meeting, every threat wrapped in a handshake. He walks the streets in workman's clothes, sometimes pushing a bicycle. Kids call him Zio Nardo, not knowing the fear he commands. Shopkeepers nod to him without realizing they just paid tribute. At home, his mother still believes he's in agriculture. She tells neighbors he's a land surveyor, and perhaps, in a way, he is. Surveying power, measuring loyalty, digging the graves of old loyalties to make room for new ones. One day, a young boy sees Bernardo standing alone by the church, hands clasped behind his back, watching pigeons. The boy asks if he's waiting for someone. Bernardo doesn't answer. He just smiles and says, "I'm counting feathers." Years later, that boy realizes he wasn't talking about birds. The hills of Corleone stretch outward like a stone quilt, stitched together by goat paths and secrets. In this quiet world, blood is spilled softly, like wine tipped in reverence. Bernardo Provenzano, still in his late 20s, understands this better than most. His silence is no longer just a trait. It's a strategy, a shield, a weapon. It starts, as these things often do, with a vineyard dispute. Two families, both minor players in the local power web, clash over boundaries. A stone wall shifts 6 feet. A cousin insults an uncle. A few sheep go missing. At first, it's small. Pettiness, really. But in Sicily, the line between a land feud and a funeral is drawn in soft chalk. One night, the younger son from one family doesn't come home. His body is found 3 days later in a ravine, arms crossed, eyes open, as if he's waiting for a priest who won't arrive. There are no signs of struggle, no note, no obvious cause. Just a single bullet wound, clean, behind the ear. The police come. They ask questions. No one answers. The wind rustles the vines, and somewhere nearby, someone coughs deliberately. And then something strange happens. Nothing. The other family doesn't retaliate. They move out. Quietly. Their vineyard goes up for sale at a suspiciously low price. Within weeks, it's in the hands of a shell company linked to one of Provenzano's associates. No paperwork connects the dots. But the pattern, it's perfect. This is how Bernardo learns to kill without killing. He doesn't order hits anymore, not in the traditional sense. He rearranges circumstances. He adjusts pressure. He knows when to lean on someone's debt, when to smile at a cousin's funeral, when to leave an envelope beneath a priest's chalice. Many people still think that Provenzano's real apprenticeship was not in blood, but in bureaucracy. So what do you think? Can an empire be built entirely on timing, restraint, and an impeccable sense of human frailty? As Sicily drifts into the late 1950s, larger forces begin to ripple through the region. The Cold War casts long shadows. The Italian government teeters between leftist idealism and conservative control. And through it all, Cosa Nostra thrives in the margins. Bernardo and Reina understand this new terrain. While other bosses still dream of American-style flash, the cars, the suits, the cigars, Provenzano refines invisibility into an art. No driver, no villa, just a series of rented rooms, cousins' couches, farmhouse basements. But make no mistake, his reach expands. By now, Provenzano and Reina have risen to lead the Corleonesi faction in earnest. Their campaign is both strategic and relentless. Instead of direct war, they favor suffocation. A Palermo capo won't fall in a shootout. He'll discover his accountant missing, his mistress under surveillance, and his own nephews applying for permits in Corleone. The shift is clear. It's no longer just about crime. It's about control. Control of unions, of ports, of construction contracts. Cement, after all, is more profitable than cocaine, especially when you control who lays the foundations. One mainstream historical fact often overlooked is the quiet mafia takeover of Italy's post-war reconstruction industry. Road work, housing developments, even school buildings. Many were filtered through mafia hands, and Provenzano's hands were the steadiest of all. He speaks in phrases now, short, slow, nearly biblical in their weight. He writes down only the most necessary things, and even then, only in private code. His favorite phrase during negotiations, "Let's wait and see," which, depending on the tone, either meant you're safe or start writing your will. A priest in Palermo, known to have mafia sympathies, once described Provenzano as, "The man you pray doesn't remember your name." In 1958, an incident marks a turning point. A mid-level boss from Agrigento, seeking leverage, tries to extort one of Provenzano's allies. He believes Bernardo's reputation is exaggerated. After all, no one's ever seen him do anything. Surely, it's just smoke. A week later, the man is found slumped over his desk. No wounds, no note, just a chessboard beside him. White king tipped over. People read into that. Bernardo never admits anything, of course, but he does send the widow a small envelope containing exactly what her husband owed, with interest. Folded in half. No signature. The gesture isn't kindness, it's punctuation. The townsfolk begin to talk. Or rather, they begin to not talk in new ways. They avoid eye contact longer. They use fewer names when referencing favors. They start calling Provenzano not Utratori anymore, but L'ombra, the shadow. And yet, through it all, he remains calm. Still walks to church, still eats bread with oil and rosemary, still visits his mother once a month, though now he arrives after midnight, stays 15 minutes, and leaves before the dogs can bark. His mother tells a neighbor, "He's so thin these days. I worry he's working too hard." Working too hard indeed. The irony, of course, is that while everyone fears Bernardo, very few have actually met him. He rarely appears at formal meetings. He avoids public ceremonies. He doesn't shake hands with politicians. He just arranges who does, but in the quiet, behind the curtains of Sicily's reshuffling power structures, he's everywhere. Like fog creeping under doorways, there's a moment, not well known, but often repeated among Palermo's old-timers. A man, an ambitious young prosecutor, once threatened to reopen old cases tied to Provenzano's faction. He gave a fiery speech at a public event. The next morning, he found a single black ribbon tied to his briefcase. No harm done, no words exchanged. But he resigned that afternoon. Cited health concerns. Did Bernardo orchestrate it? No one can say, but everyone believes it, and perhaps that's the real secret. Provenzano doesn't need to act. He simply allows people's imaginations to do the work for him. He becomes, in time, less a man and more a system, an atmosphere, a gravitational pull. And like all powerful things in nature, you don't see him. You feel him. Sicily in the early 1960s begins to change, not overnight, but like mist rolling off the hills, quietly and without fanfare. The war is long over. Italy joins NATO. Televisions flicker to life in modest homes. Young men begin speaking of America with stars in their eyes. But in the town of Corleone, old habits linger beneath the surface like cracks in stone. And if you listen closely, if you lean past the hum of Sunday prayers and the clink of espresso cups, you'll hear something else. Footsteps that don't echo, messages passed in glances, and names that vanish before they're ever spoken. Bernardo Provenzano is no longer just a name in the margins. Though few would dare say it aloud, he now stands as the strategic mind behind the Corleonese faction. Toto Riina remains the hammer, loud, swift, brutal. But Provenzano? He's the compass, the silence before the avalanche. He begins attending more clandestine meetings in Palermo and Trapani. Not always in person, sometimes through a whisper, a glance, or a folded note slipped into a butcher's apron. But when he does attend, people listen more closely than they breathe. At one such meeting, later referred to only as the Olive Grove Council, several major families gather to discuss dividing up control of Sicily's heroin routes. The debate grows heated. Palermo wants majority shares. Catania disagrees. Someone accuses someone else of cheating. Voices rise, and then Provenzano speaks. He says just one sentence. Do you want to be kings of nothing or silent rulers of everything? That ends the argument. Mainstream historical fact? This era coincides with the explosive growth of heroin trafficking through the so-called pizza connection, a transatlantic operation that turned pizza parlors in New York into drug distribution fronts. Sicily was the manufacturing hub. And guess whose fingerprint you'll never find, but whose presence was always felt? Exactly. Bernardo never touches the heroin himself, never tests a batch, but he oversees the routes. He charts ports. He reviews who handles cash drops, who owns which warehouse, which customs officer has a brother with gambling debts. He memorizes faces, behaviors, allergies. He still never writes anything down. Meanwhile, back in Corleone, small things change. A new bakery opens, and its owner has a cousin who's now a mayor. A funeral home receives an unusual surge in clients, every one of them linked to a land deal that's just changed hands. A single elementary school gains funding overnight, but the concrete company that built it has 5 layers of ownership, all looping back to a silent figure. Every thread, no matter how faint, eventually leads back to Provenzano. One curious detail people often overlook is Bernardo's fascination with maps. He collects them obsessively, not tourist maps, but hand-drawn ones, topographical sketches, faded military charts from the war. He marks them with dots, symbols, initials, then he burns them. One ex-associate claims Provenzano could recall every road between Corleone and Palermo, including which had potholes, which had loose dogs, which gas station clerks were prone to gossip. Give him a town and a motive, the associate said, and he'd give you the outcome before it even started. And then, of course, there's his nickname, the Tractor. It returns during this time in darker whispers. People remember why they first called him that. Because he doesn't stop. Ever. Slowly, methodically, he clears what's in his way. Fields of rivals, rows of skeptics, stones of tradition. He plows through it all, not violently, not recklessly, but with the terrifying calm of inevitability. You don't argue with a tractor, you step aside. One mid-tier boss from Messina tries not to step aside. He refuses to cede territory, starts making speeches, sends public letters to newspapers. Within a month, his wife moves back to her mother's. His brother is arrested for fraud. His driver vanishes. And finally, he himself retires and relocates to Argentina. He never comes back. No blood, no threats, just pressure applied like the sun, constant, inescapable. Many people still think that Provenzano's truest gift was not his ruthlessness, but his patience, that he could wait out men, investigations, even entire governments. So, what do you think? In the end, is time the sharpest weapon of all? Meanwhile, Totorina becomes more visible, more erratic. He begins ordering bombings, kidnappings, acts of such violence that even other mafia families start to recoil. Provenzano watches, quietly disapproves, but he says nothing. Not yet, because he knows what others don't. Rina is digging his own grave, and Provenzano, he's already planting vines around the tombstone. There's one evening, documented only in rumor, where Bernardo sits at a hilltop above Corleone, staring out at the distant flicker of Palermo's lights. A driver approaches, asking if he's lost. Bernardo replies, "No, just watching history forget itself." He gets in the car, doesn't say another word the entire drive. By the mid-1960s, Sicily breathes beneath the weight of invisible hands. To outsiders, it looks like progress. New roads, new churches, small towns swelling with asphalt and ambition. But for those who understand how power whispers, this is not progress. It's consolidation. The ground is being bought out beneath their feet, one brick at a time, by men they've never seen and never will. And among these men, Bernardo Provenzano walks lighter than ever. The legend of Infiltrating, the tractor, continues, but it's not just about his relentlessness anymore. It's about precision, timing, that eerie calm before everything changes. He no longer needs to attend every meeting, not even the critical ones. Just a nod from an associate, a cryptic phrase in a letter, and people shift course like compasses toward a stronger magnetic field. A curious historical shift happens in this decade. The mafia begins a subtle pivot from traditional crime families with local muscle to a more corporate model. Heroin labs in rural Sicily start refining product that ends up in New York nightclubs. Politicians begin using the term influence networks, a euphemism, of course, for mafia money laundering through construction, logistics, and agriculture. Guess who designs these invisible corridors? Provenzano. He never boasts, never signs. His business meetings are sometimes held during funerals or baptisms. One Palermo contractor recalls shaking hands with him during a child's first communion. He smiled once, the man said, but it was the kind of smile that asks, "You sure you want to keep talking?" Meanwhile, his partnership with Totorina continues to grow. But there's tension now, a difference in methods that can't be bridged with old loyalties. Rina is volatile. He likes force, reminders, noise. He begins tightening his grip over Palermo with spectacular brutality. Bodies in alleys, bombs, public executions. The newspapers, for the first time in years, mention Cosa Nostra with fear again. Provenzano says nothing, but his eyes begin to narrow. There's a moment when a local boss, too drunk, too loud, refers to Raina as the monster of Corleone. The man laughs at his own joke. Within 2 weeks, he dies of a heart attack, or so the papers say. Later, when asked if he had anything to do with it, Provenzano simply says, "A man who talks too much wears his own funeral suit." There's a scholar in Rome, still active today, who claims this was the moment Provenzano began shifting his long-term plan, that he understood Rina's era would burn hot, but not last. Many people still think that Bernardo prepared for Rina's downfall long before anyone else saw it coming. So what do you think? Can foresight in a world of fire make you a king without a crown? Let's talk Pitsini. These small scraps of paper, handwritten, folded multiple times, passed from cousin to priest to bakery worker, become Provenzano's new currency. Each note contains instructions, but no direct names. Initials, code phrases, references only insiders understand. His handwriting is barely legible, not because he's hiding, but because years of avoiding phones and typewriters have made penmanship an endangered art. He never uses a full name, never includes dates, often ends with a prayer or proverb, as if blessing the transaction. One intercepted Pitsini reads, "Speak to the friend of the friend. The oranges are ready. Don't overwater." Police would spend months decoding that into a meeting in Catania, a heroin shipment scheduled for the third week of April, and a bribe paid through an agricultural union. And yet, no fingerprints, no audio, just ink, folded 10 times. Back in Corleone, Provenzano begins withdrawing from even his closest associates. Not out of fear, but out of design. He starts spending more time in the hills again, on foot, sometimes with a pack of cigarettes, sometimes with a goat herder as his only company. He's not hiding, he's watching. At a village wedding, he appears without fanfare. No guards, no entourage, just a cousin by his side. The bride's father is a longtime ally, and Provenzano brings a modest gift, a rosary carved from olive wood. No gold, no envelope of cash, just quiet faith, and a reminder of who really blesses the unions in these towns. In this same period, historians note a sharp increase in natural deaths among minor mafiosi. Heart attacks, strokes, suicides, strange coincidences. None make headlines, but each leaves behind a property suddenly up for sale, a debt mysteriously cleared, or a widow who knows better than to ask. Provenzano's fingerprints are nowhere, but his rhythm, it's unmistakable. He begins to resemble something larger than a man, a phenomenon. His name is never spoken in anger. His decisions are not questioned. And if someone disagrees, that disagreement dissolves like sugar in coffee, slowly, sweetly, then gone. A mid-level boss from Palermo once joked to a friend, "I'd rather owe Lucifer than disappoint Bernardo." The friend asked why. Because Lucifer might still take your confession. Even law enforcement grows wary. The few investigators who start to suspect Provenzano is the brain behind Riena's muscle run into obstacles, missing files, reassigned officers, bureaucratic dead ends. It's not magic, it's management. Do you remember how he once counted feathers outside the church? He's still counting. Only now, the feathers are allegiances, favors, vulnerabilities. And he remembers every single one. By 1969, one particularly ambitious prosecutor issues a warrant for a Palermo construction mogul believed to be laundering drug money. The warrant disappears before it can be signed. The prosecutor's car catches fire in a parking lot. He leaves Sicily for good. Again, no fingerprints, just shadows. One morning, Bernardo visits a bakery in Corleone. He buys a loaf, nods to the baker, and leaves. The baker's apprentice, unfamiliar with local politics, asks who that quiet man was. The baker doesn't answer right away, just slices the bread, wraps it slowly, and says, "He's why we don't sell to strangers." Palermo wakes each morning like a city pretending not to be afraid. Policemen sip espresso and glance over their shoulders. Judges drive different routes to work each day. Journalists double-lock their doors. And somewhere, deep in the folds of Sicily, Bernardo Provenzano tightens the net without ever being seen pulling the strings. It's the early 1970s now, and Cosa Nostra's empire grows outward like moss, quiet, persistent, and difficult to remove once it settles. The Corleonesi faction, now fully under the dual guidance of Riina and Provenzano, has transformed from rural muscle into a continental business empire. Construction, agriculture, finance, and of course drugs, all touched, guided, or blessed by invisible hands. Provenzano's genius doesn't come from shouting orders. It comes from knowing when not to. The men around him may speak, threaten, even kill, but Bernardo just adjusts the variables until the outcome he wants becomes the only one possible. One example, a shipping container arrives in Trapani. It's labeled as containing coffee beans. It actually holds nearly 400 kilos of refined heroin. Customs officers clear it without inspection. Why? Because Provenzano made sure that 6 months earlier, the officer's niece received a job through a friend of a friend. Gratitude, after all, can last longer than fear. Historical fact: between 1970 and 1984, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration reported a staggering surge in heroin originating from Sicily, specifically routed through small businesses and cafes tied to what would later be known as the Pizza Connection. Many of these routes were mapped years in advance. Provenzano's name never appeared once. His influence, however, was embedded in the architecture of the operation. And yet, he remains a ghost. Toto Riina, meanwhile, is becoming noisier. The boss of bosses begins launching direct attacks on rival families, judges, and politicians. Bombs explode in Palermo, sometimes mid-morning, sometimes at rush hour. Riina believes in fear as strategy. Provenzano does not. He believes in inevitability. They don't argue, at least not outwardly. But the split in philosophy is clear. One rules with fire, the other with fog. At a countryside meeting, later known among insiders as the meal with no wine, the two men sit with several underbosses at a table laid with bread and olives. Riina speaks loudly, pounds the table once, promises a new Sicily cleansed by strength. Provenzano doesn't interrupt. He just wipes his fingers on a napkin, looks down at his plate, and says softly, "If you break everything at once, you'll have to live in the ruins." No one responds, but the message lingers. That same month, a Palermo builder receives word that his permits are delayed. The builder complains to a local paper. A week later, his project burns to the ground in what officials call an electrical fire. He leaves Sicily. His contracts are picked up by another company, with ties to a Provenzano associate. That's the difference. Riina enforces loyalty with firebombs. Provenzano uses real estate. There's a story, probably apocryphal, but told with conviction in Sicilian bars, about a woman who accidentally receives one of Bernardo's Pitsini. It was meant for a cousin working at the local train depot. She finds it folded between tomatoes in a market crate. She reads it, doesn't understand it, and brings it to the parish priest. 2 days later, the crate vendor packs up and leaves town. The woman receives a new refrigerator from an anonymous donor. The priest resigns and joins a monastery in Milan. No one speaks of the note again. And Provenzano? He attends a baptism that weekend. Quietly. Brings olive soap as a gift. Do you remember the maps he used to draw, then burn? He's still mapping, only now it's in his head. Routes between Spain and Sicily, cash corridors through Zurich, fallback identities in case of arrest. He doesn't need to write it down. His mind is a vault. At home, well, what passes for home, he moves every few weeks. Sometimes a goat shed, sometimes a cousin's attic. Always rustic, always forgettable. He prefers buildings with weak cell signals, single entrances, and plenty of trees. He shaves with cold water, keeps 3 shirts on rotation, and refuses to let anyone photograph him. One of his lieutenants jokes once, "If Bernardo ever dies, how will we know it's him?" Another replies, because everything will stop working. In 1974, a young carabiniere named Luca Messina gets close. Too close. He spends 2 years investigating a construction firm linked to Provenzano's shell companies. Luca's wife finds an envelope taped to their front door. No note inside. Just a black chess pawn. They move to Rome within the month. Luca becomes a traffic cop. He never speaks of Sicily again. Many people still think the mafia of this era was run by violence alone. But so what do you think? Is it possible the real power was in suggestion? In creating a world where silence felt safer than justice? By now, Provenzano rarely attends funerals unless absolutely necessary. He sends envelopes instead, often with a handwritten note, always ending with a phrase like, "Let the Lord weigh his debts," and people nod. Because in Sicily, God is eternal, but Provenzano is still around to collect. He's still working closely with Rina, yes, but only in public. In private, he begins grooming his own web of younger associates, men who prefer the quiet method, the long game, men who believe, as Bernardo does, that control is like gravity, unseen, constant, and never negotiated. He advises one of them, a young capo from Agrigento. You don't need to own the bank, just the man who locks it at night. It's these kinds of phrases, gentle, deliberate, that make Provenzano seem more philosopher than gangster, a crime lord whose weapons are time and trust. That winter, a man from Rome visits Corleone to research folklore. He asks too many questions, tapes a few conversations, interviews a retired butcher who once served the quiet one. A week later, the man's car is found idling at a cliff's edge. Doors open. No sign of him. A recorder is found on the passenger seat. The tape inside has only one message recorded. Do not chase ghosts. By 1975, the air in Palermo has taken on a curious density. Thick not with fog, but with knowledge unspoken. It hangs over the markets and seeps into church pews, a collective knowing that certain questions are best left unasked. And in that heavy silence, Bernardo Provenzano operates more freely than ever. He no longer walks the streets of Corleone in daylight. His days of pretending to be a laborer or a cousin's cousin are behind him. Now he belongs to the space behind closed shutters, the hours after the bells stop ringing. If Raina is the storm that rolls through the town, Provenzano is the humidity that never lifts. His reach grows in new directions. Banks in Switzerland begin to hum with quiet activity. Names, barely traceable, begin appearing on property deeds from Palermo to Milan. And always, the money returns to Sicily, cleaner than before, folded into agricultural subsidies, art auctions, and sometimes, just for irony, Catholic charities. One mainstream historical fact that gains traction during this time is the Vatican's exposure in financial scandals, some of which, investigators claim, brushed dangerously close to mafia involvement. While never directly linked, whispers lingered in Roman alleyways and Sicilian cafes. And guess who was allegedly seen near a bishop's summer home in 1976? No one. But many people still think it was Bernardo. So what do you think? Can a man who doesn't appear in photos still cast a shadow over the Vatican's marble floors? In this same era, a shift in public perception takes place. Judges, once respected but ignored, begin taking center stage. The anti-mafia movement, long considered idealistic and toothless, suddenly finds new life. Young prosecutors, men like Rocco Cinici and Giovanni Falcone, begin asking sharper questions. And Provenzano watches. He doesn't react with violence. That's Raina's department. Raina begins targeting judges, police, journalists, his logic being, If fear built their empire, fear will defend it. But Bernardo sees things differently. He tells a close associate, "If you break the glass, even the light comes in." Still, he doesn't stop Rina. Not yet. Instead, Provenzano deepens his own web. He strengthens contacts within the business world. He offers favors to politicians needing campaign funds. He arranges for jobs, for transfers, for debts to vanish. Each one a thread looped around someone's future decision. There's a marble supplier in Palermo. Just a small operation, family run. One day, they receive a surprise contract to provide stone for a new courthouse. The contract was originally awarded to a Roman firm, but was suddenly rescinded. No explanation given. The marble is delivered on time. Invoices are paid early. Years later, one of the supplier's sons becomes a municipal clerk. The kind of clerk who knows how to stall permits or accelerate them. This is Provenzano's genius. He doesn't force people to choose. He arranges the circumstances so that they want to choose him. A man gets promoted. A debt is forgiven. A rival suddenly gets audited. It all feels like fate, until you realize the calendar was written years in advance by someone who never held a pen in public. Do you remember the baker's apprentice? The one who asked who that quiet man was? He now runs a wholesale flour business in Palermo. When asked, he says he built it himself, but he always keeps one drawer locked and has 3 unlisted phone numbers. In 1977, an old childhood friend of Bernardo's visits Corleone for a funeral. He hasn't seen Bernardo in over 20 years. As he pays respects near the churchyard, someone slips him a note. Don't linger. He leaves before nightfall. Later, he tells a neighbor, it wasn't a threat, it was a kindness. This is the strange paradox of Provenzano. He's feared, yes, but not like Rina. There's no fire in his fury, just gravity. He doesn't scream, he leans, and when he does, people don't fall. They bow. One night in 1978, Provenzano allegedly holds a private meeting in a farmhouse with 3 influential men, a union leader, a city councilor, and a banker. What's discussed is never recorded, but a few things happen shortly after. A major port construction project is canceled. A rival union boss is arrested on unrelated charges. A small town outside Palermo gets a sudden influx of funding for a new stadium. Coincidence? That's the word Palermo journalists start using more and more. Coincidence, like a password, like a confession. Meanwhile, Rina continues his path of open domination. More blood in the streets. More names added to the list of martyrs. Falcone and Borsellino begin appearing on television, speaking in calm voices that carry fire. The people listen. Some cheer, some tremble. And Provenzano? He begins writing fewer Pitsini. Not because he's less active, because he no longer needs to explain. Those who understand already know. Those who don't will never be in the room anyway. A priest once said that Provenzano had the patience of a saint and the memory of a gravedigger. He meant it as both compliment and warning. There's another story, told in whispers in Trapani, about a customs officer who denied a bribe. Just once. Just out of pride. His daughter's wedding was canceled when the venue flooded unexpectedly. His car broke down on the way to a court appointment. A health inspector found insect larvae in his restaurant's kitchen. None were ever confirmed. He transferred to Bologna the next year. And when asked what made him leave, he said, I began to feel like I was standing on wet paper. That's the Provenzano effect. It's not a punch. It's a pressure system. And when it settles in, nothing stays dry. By 1979, The world beyond Sicily is shifting into technicolor. Disco booms in New York. The Berlin Wall still stands, but cracks have begun to hum behind it. In Rome, fashion glitters and scandals simmer. And yet in Corleone, the clocks seem older, slower, as if time itself walks barefoot through the dust, careful not to disturb the quiet. And in that quiet, Bernardo Provenzano thrives. His name is never spoken in Parliament. His photo is still unavailable. To most Italians, he is an echo, known only by stories, mentioned only with lowered voices. But to those who understand power, he's something else. The one variable you must account for. The one you hope is already on your side. He's now the undisputed strategic brain of the Corleonesi. While Toto Riina continues making headlines with blood, blown-up judges, assassinated mayors, Provenzano is crafting a machine, an invisible bureaucracy. His empire isn't just built on fear, it's built on function. That year, Palermo experiences a bizarre coincidence. A dozen public works contracts, everything from sewage upgrades to new electrical grids, are awarded to small firms, many of which seem unrelated. But when investigators later review their tax records, they all lead back to the same accountant. An accountant whose brother lives in a stone farmhouse outside Corleone. A farmhouse with no phone line, no mailbox, and a guest who sometimes arrives with fresh ricotta and leaves with folded notes. One mainstream historical fact tucked quietly into parliamentary records. Between 1979 and 1982, government subsidies for agricultural development in Sicily increased by nearly 300%. And yet, food production barely moved. Many people still think those funds never touched a farm, at least not the kind with tractors. So what do you think? If corruption wears a suit and signs forms in triplicate, is it still crime? Or just budgeting? Provenzano continues to avoid the spotlight. He gives no speeches, never uses the phone. But his Pitsini network becomes more sophisticated. Messages now include subtle markers, creases in certain places, red dots made with paprika dust, even dried flower petals pressed between layers. Each sign signals something. Urgency, danger, success. His handwriting remains terrible, not by design, just the mark of a man who spent too long writing in shadows. Meanwhile, Riina grows restless. He wants more, always more. He begins pressing Provenzano. Why delay a hit? Why negotiate with rival families? Why bother with codes and symbols when a bullet works just as well? Bernardo listens, nods, then replies, because fear burns fast, but respect is a slower fire. It smokes longer. It's the closest he'll ever come to disagreement. And for now, it's enough. But the machine is starting to creak. Some younger mafiosi begin idolizing Riina's boldness over Provenzano's patience. They want action, visibility. And that shift, subtle as it is, worries Bernardo. Because visibility is a liability. The more you're seen, the more you're targeted. He starts building contingency plans, secondary networks, private channels, even temporary safe houses equipped with canned food, clean clothes, and old transistor radios. He instructs one associate. If everything ends, go north. Follow the priest's map, the one in the drawer. The associate never asks what that means. He just memorizes it. At the same time, prosecutors are starting to make progress. A task force led by Judge Rocco Cinici begins connecting dots. Names, numbers, contracts. There are whispers of a large-scale trial, something that might finally expose the inner workings of Cosa Nostra. Provenzano knows it's coming, not tomorrow, but soon. And so he begins distancing himself, not publicly. He has no public life, but in ways only the careful notice. He no longer sends Pitsini directly. He no longer travels even within Sicily unless absolutely necessary. And when he does, he wears old man disguises, loose hats, limps, broken glasses held together with tape. Do you remember the olive wood rosary he once gave as a baptism gift? He started carving them again, not for piety, for routine, for the steady rhythm of control. Every bead, a breath. Every breath, a plan. In late 1980, a magistrate named Cesare Terranova is found shot in his car. Riena's message is clear. No one is untouchable. Provenzano doesn't celebrate. He visits a shepherd's hut in the hills and spends 2 nights alone. When he returns, he instructs one of his men to purchase 20 kilos of dried lentils, 7 new burner stoves, and 3 more transistor radios. Quietly, his network begins preparing not just for war, but for absence, because the future he sees coming isn't a battlefield, it's a vacuum. There's a soft moment, captured only in hearsay, where Provenzano sits by a cracked window overlooking the valley. A boy brings him bread and cheese. Bernardo thanks him, asks if he likes school. The boy nods, says he wants to be a pilot. Bernardo smiles. Then remember this. The sky doesn't care who's watching. It only cares who keeps climbing. The boy never forgets. Years later, that same boy would run a charter plane service out of Trapani. No one ever traced the connection. But the records show that between 1982 and 1984, 6 anonymous flights left that airfield, each carrying agricultural machinery. Each flight landed in Marseille. Each shipment vanished. Coincidence? Or just another feather counted on a Sunday? It is now 1981, and Palermo stands on the edge of something both inevitable and unseen. Riena's war is in full swing. Dead judges, slain rivals, bombed convoys, and the city trembles beneath headlines it never wanted. But in a stone farmhouse northeast of Corleone, a different rhythm beats, slower, calmer, more permanent. Bernardo Provenzano no longer speaks much, even to his own people. His instructions come through Pitsini left beneath benches, behind altars, under sacks of flour. They're rarely longer than a few sentences. Sometimes they aren't sentences at all, just initials, arrows, or the outline of a shoe. And yet, entire empires rearrange themselves in response. Meanwhile, Judge Giovanni Falcone begins quietly compiling the case that will one day shake the mafia's bones. A network of wiretaps, informants, accountants, and tax records slowly builds like storm clouds gathering over Sicily's hills. The Maxi trial is not yet announced, but the storm is coming. Provenzano, ever attuned to shifts in the wind, doesn't panic. He prepares. He tells his closest associate, "Don't wait for the fire to burn. Move your matches." It's not just a warning. It's a relocation order. Within a month, 2 key safe houses are emptied. Documents are moved. Shell companies folded. A courier sent to Spain, another to Zurich, one even to Venezuela, with a briefcase containing not money, but ledgers, names, codes, all written in Provenzano's scrawl. This is the beginning of what police would later call the Burrowing, the years where Bernardo removes himself not just from view, but from trace. Phone records, travel logs, tax returns, none exist. His official status becomes one of a fugitive. But in practice, he's a monarch without a mirror. Many people still think that Bernardo's decision to vanish was a strategy, not necessity. So, what do you think? If a man erases his shadow before you even shine a light, was he ever really there to begin with? Totò Riina, by contrast, continues his rampage. He orders the murder of General Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, a decorated anti-terrorism official brought to Palermo to fight the mafia. Dalla Chiesa had barely unpacked his suitcase when he and his wife were ambushed and gunned down in their car. The public mourns, politicians grumble, the mafia grows bolder, and Provenzano? He doesn't gloat. He sends no message. He simply adjusts the calendar. Rina's methods, once tolerated, now begin to wear thin. Not just with the public, but within the mafia itself. Other families, once aligned in silence, begin to question whether this bloody spotlight is worth it. A few start reaching out, discreetly, to intermediaries. They don't say Bernardo's name. They don't have to, because Bernardo is the quiet option, the fallback, the design that was sketched long before the bombings. Back in Corleone, a new farmhouse becomes his refuge. It has no electricity, no plumbing, just stone walls, a fireplace, and a radio powered by hand crank. He cooks his own meals, reads prayer books, and carves crosses into olive branches, not for devotion, but for discipline. He keeps time by the seasons, not the clock. He sends Pitsini by mule, often folded into the collars of shepherd dogs. One note, found years later, reads, "Plant early. The frost is coming. To most, it's about tomatoes. But to the right man in Palermo, it's a command to shift laundering operations to Naples before an audit arrives." Do you remember the accountant whose brother lived near the original safe house? He's now a ghost. Moved to Sicily's interior, keeps bees, talks to no one. But his honey appears regularly on the table at Provenzano's farmhouse. A small, steady transaction. The kind that says, "I'm still here." In 1982, a high-level informant flips. Tommaso Buscetta, once a trusted member of the Sicilian underworld, agrees to testify. His decision detonates through the mafia like a silent bomb. Names spill. Histories unravel. Alliances fray. Rina responds with fury. Orders more killings. Faster. Louder. Provenzano tightens the circle. He stops using go-betweens who aren't family. Messages now go through only 3 people: cousins, lifelong friends, or men whose families Bernardo personally fed during lean winters. The loyalty isn't bought, it's grown. Like olives, one Pitsino, intercepted but never fully decoded, ends with, "He remembers who shared bread." As Palermo spirals, Provenzano seems almost untouched. Not invincible, just removed. Like a chess master who laid his final pieces years ago and is now watching everyone else panic 2 moves too late. There's a moment, known only to a few, when a young anti-mafia activist sneaks into Corleone. He believes he's onto something, some proof, some connection. He disappears. 3 days later, his sister receives a postcard. No return address. Just a drawing of a stone church and the words, "Some bells are not yours to ring." She leaves Sicily, becomes a schoolteacher in Florence, never speaks of her brother again. Provenzano is now spoken of in mythic terms. Children are told that if they disobey, the man with no shoes will come for them. Old women pray with his name, not against it, hoping his mercy will spare their sons. Men in back rooms offer to speak to the quiet one, knowing full well he no longer speaks unless necessary, and yet he listens. He always listens. By 1983, the silence in Sicily has grown heavy, like a curtain thick with soot. Rina's war rages on. More murders, more bombs, a mafia increasingly bloated with violence and soaked in paranoia. Palermo is exhausted. The names of the dead spill across newspaper columns like daily prayers no one wants to recite anymore. And somewhere in a farmhouse no larger than a stable, Bernardo Provenzano lights a stove with a matchstick and fries 2 eggs in olive oil. The window is cracked. The sheep are quiet. His empire, untouched by headlines, continues to hum. Provenzano is still invisible. Still not on any public wanted list. Still without fingerprints, photographs, or confirmed sightings. But inside the machinery of Cosa Nostra, his influence is unmistakable. His Pitsini arrive on schedule. His coded instructions dictate real estate purchases, money laundering shifts, even personnel changes within the hierarchy. And still, he uses no names, only initials, sometimes symbols. A tomato sketch might mean a planned shipment to the port of Catania. A feather might indicate a political favor that needs soft handling. This is no longer just discretion, it's design. And to those closest to him, it becomes clear. Provenzano isn't hiding from justice. He's editing reality. Meanwhile, the Italian government prepares to strike back. The Maxi trial, long rumored, is finally in motion. Judge Giovanni Falcone and his team compile thousands of pages of testimony, wiretap transcripts, and business records. It's the most ambitious anti-mafia prosecution in history. But there's a problem. They have Rina. They have dozens of capos. They have maps of dead men's homes, phone records, and confession after confession. But they don't have Provenzano. His name comes up, yes, often, as the other one, as the calm one. But where is he? That becomes the question on every investigator's lips. Even Buscetta, now cooperating with Falcone, can't provide an exact location. He tells them, Provenzano disappears between the trees. You don't find him. You find what he left behind. In Palermo, as trials begin, Riina is furious. He believes more blood will protect them. That terror is the best armor. He doubles down. Judges, journalists, even police drivers become targets. The city chokes on fear. And Provenzano? He watches a bird's nest collapse outside his window, then calmly writes a pizzino that begins, "Too many eggs, too few trees." The note reaches a construction magnate in Palermo. Days later, that magnate cancels 3 pending contracts, ones that would have drawn too much attention. He switches to agricultural expansion, applies for a tax credit, all by suggestion. This is what makes Provenzano different. Rina wants to win. Provenzano wants to last. Do you remember the shepherd dog who carried messages? That same dog now lives in a different village, following a different route, its collar stitched with thicker thread. A police officer once tried to follow it. The dog vanished into the hills for 3 days, then returned, alone. The officer was reassigned to Naples. That year, Provenzano begins rotating his hideouts every 3 months. Some are abandoned goat barns, others are rented through fake cousins. One is simply a cave with dry straw and a transistor radio sealed in a biscuit tin. He carries with him 2 changes of clothes, a shaving kit, a small notebook filled with prayers and coded notes, a pocket knife that, according to one associate, was never used on anything but apples. A strange rhythm sets in. Every Sunday, he listens to the same Vatican broadcast on the radio. He eats boiled vegetables. He sometimes hums an old Sicilian folk song about lost fishermen, and through it all, the machinery of his empire continues to function. One confirmed historical moment comes in 1985. The Italian parliament quietly blocks a proposed anti-money laundering bill, citing bureaucratic complications. Investigators later discover that several of the bill's fiercest opponents received campaign donations from firms indirectly tied to Corleone construction projects. No one is prosecuted, but the pattern speaks. So what do you think? Can one man move a nation's laws with just a whisper, or does the whisper merely reach ears already tilted? Within the mafia, whispers of discontent rise. Riina is now seen as dangerous, not just to enemies, but to allies. He ignores warnings, orders hits that draw heat. Provenzano warns him subtly, then less subtly. Eventually, he sends a Pitsino that reads simply, "Fire burns all, those who hold the torch too." Riina ignores it, and Bernardo begins to drift, not away, but beneath. He stops attending even the most secretive meetings. From this point forward, only 5 men speak to him directly. All cousins, all born before 1950, all vetted through layers of familial obligation and childhood debts. One of them later tells a priest in confession, he doesn't trust anyone who hasn't lost something. And what has Provenzano lost? A normal life, a family, a face the public can name. And yet, he's also gained something rarer, control so complete that it requires no performance, no presence, just gravity. There's a story of a shoemaker in Corleone who makes a pair of custom slippers every December and leaves them by a well behind the church. No one ever picks them up. But one day in spring, a new set of nails appears in the shoemaker's workshop, paid in full. Coincidence or tradition? Either way, the shoemaker doesn't stop. Because Bernardo Provenzano is no longer just a man. He is a ritual, a system, a story you don't question, because the silence that follows is the answer. It's 1986, and the Maxi trial is fully underway. Over 400 defendants, hundreds of witnesses, a courtroom built inside a prison, fortified like a fortress. Sicily is holding its breath, and for the first time in decades, the mafia is truly on the defensive. Toto Riina watches from behind bars, snarling through the bulletproof glass. His war has arrived at its reckoning. The press call it justice. Palermo calls it a miracle. And somewhere far away, in a farmhouse with no address, Bernardo Provenzano stirs sugar into his coffee and says nothing, because this was always part of the plan. You see, Riina burned too brightly, drew too much attention. The blood on his hands made headlines, made martyrs, made enemies with long memories. But Provenzano, his hands are clean, not in innocence, but in abstinence. He didn't plant the bombs. He didn't attend the meetings. He didn't touch the knives. And so, when the judge reads out the list of life sentences, life for Riina, life for Bagarella, life for legions of lieutenants, Provenzano's name is not called. Not because he isn't guilty, but because no one can prove he even exists. This is his art. One mainstream historical detail from the Maxi trial's early days. Of the nearly 500 original defendants, only one never had a mugshot on file. No confirmed fingerprint, no known safe house, no audio surveillance, no family photographs. That man, the ghost of Corleone. So what do you think? Is that absence a failure of justice, or its most damning evidence? In the shadows left by the trial, Provenzano begins to rebuild, not just the family, but the philosophy. He's seen the limits of violence. Riina's approach scorched the landscape, but left no crops. So Bernardo shifts gears. He sends new Pitsini, this time using religious phrasing. Grace over strength, structure over fire, bread before blade. His lieutenants notice the change. So do politicians. Provenzano's new order is quiet, focused on infiltration instead of confrontation. Hospitals, construction permits, agricultural grants. He slips into these systems like water through cracked stone. One day, a hospital administrator in Catania receives a funding bonus after months of delays. No one claims credit. But the administrator, who once shared communion wine with a Provenzano cousin, knows better than to ask. From that day forward, the hospital only orders laundry services from a certain company. That company never delivers late, never overcharges, and never misses a donation to the local bishop's charity, and the machine turns silently. Meanwhile, Rena's world contracts. Behind prison walls, his rage simmers. He believes Provenzano abandoned him, that Bernardo should have sent lawyers, bribed juries, staged riots. Instead, Bernardo sent quiet. One Pitsini, delivered by hand to a Rena family member, read simply, "Storms leave fields bare, now we plant." In Corleone, people begin noticing subtle shifts. There are fewer police raids, fewer bodies in the street, but there are more permits filed, more businesses opened, more churches suddenly receiving new paint and funding. The mafia hasn't disappeared. It's simply changed frequency. Do you remember the old man who left shoes behind the church each December? He dies in 1987, quietly, in his sleep. At his funeral, a stranger no one recognizes places a single loaf of bread on the casket, wrapped in linen, still warm, people whisper, but no one removes the bread. That same year, an ambitious city councilor in Palermo announces a plan to audit every construction contract awarded in the last 10 years. A week later, his wife inherits an unexpected piece of property, an abandoned olive grove. The audit stalls. The councilor retires early. No threats, just an adjustment. Because Provenzano knows something most men forget. You don't need to eliminate the problem. You just need to tilt it. His circle remains impossibly small. Only 3 men know his exact location at any given time. Each of them also knows the price of betrayal, and not in bullets, but in isolation. Because Bernardo doesn't kill traitors, he erases them, not physically, but socially, financially, spiritually. One informant tells a judge, "When he disappears you're still breathing. You just don't exist anymore." That's a different kind of power. That's structural power. In late 1988, a priest from Corleone receives a donation envelope with no return address. Inside, $3,000 in lyre, a note reading, "For the roof, may no rain fall on the children." The priest asks around. No one knows who sent it. But the next Sunday, every politician in the front pew bows just a little deeper during Mass. The same month, a bridge construction project quietly reroutes its concrete supplier. The new supplier's name doesn't appear on any public record, but its founder once delivered eggs to the Provenzano family farm in 1952. Coincidence? Many people still think so. But the shepherds in the hills? They nod. They know. And Provenzano? He sits at a chipped wooden table, slicing peaches. Hears the church bells in the distance. Smiles once. Writes a note that simply says, "Winter is slower, but the roots go deeper." And with that, his plan for the 1990s begins. Not a resurgence, not revenge, but permanence. The 1990s arrive, and with them, the world outside Sicily changes at a dizzying pace. The Berlin Wall falls. The internet stirs to life. Global finance surges. But in the shadowed groves of Corleone, time moves differently. Here, a man writes instructions with a cheap pen on folded scraps of paper and buries them in bread loaves. No laptops, no headlines, just continuity. Bernardo Provenzano is now nearly 60, and yet his control is firmer than ever. With Toto Riina finally captured in January 1993, dragged into daylight after decades of bloodshed, most assume Provenzano will fade as well. Perhaps they believe he was only Riina's shadow. A footnote. the silent partner. They're wrong, because this is precisely what Bernardo planned for. The fire dies down, and he's the one left standing in the ashes, sweeping up with gloved hands. One mainstream historical fact: Riena's capture triggered a sudden and steep drop in mafia-related murders across Sicily. But government investigators noticed something else: financial crime, especially in the public sector, mysteriously increased. Contracts multiplied, invoices tripled, municipal debts rose without clear cause. Many people still think Provenzano was behind this pivot, turning Sicily's crime family into a white-collar conglomerate. So, what do you think? When a ghost stops haunting houses and starts haunting spreadsheets, is it progress or just better lighting? With Riina gone, Provenzano doesn't claim the title of boss of bosses. That would be too loud. Instead, he becomes the coordinator. It sounds bureaucratic, harmless, but everyone knows what it means. He begins restructuring Cosa Nostra like a corporate boardroom. Promotions now favor the discreet. Brutes and hotheads are phased out. Young men with university degrees, clean records, and quiet mouths rise quickly, especially those with relatives in accounting or public works. Provenzano even issues guidelines in his Pitsini. Things like, do not speak in cars, do not attend weddings outside family circles, do not wear expensive clothes, do not carry weapons unless necessary. Avoid contact with media, lawyers, and women who drink. He's not joking. This isn't paranoia, it's preservation. He wants a mafia that lives below the radar, one that doesn't bleed, but absorbs. One lieutenant describes the change like this: before we were lions, now we are ivy. He's not wrong. Provenzano's strategy is slow, winding, and almost invisible, but it wraps itself around everything: banking, healthcare, local politics, garbage collection, even charities. In Palermo, a new park is built. The construction company is clean. The contractors are clean. The mayor signs off. But the plastic benches? Sourced from a shell company in Naples, owned by another company in Milan, whose listed president is a 92-year-old widow in Trapani, whose nephew once carried wine for Provenzano. And the loop continues. Back in Corleone, Provenzano's living conditions remain Spartan. He sleeps on a cot, eats garlic soup and stale bread. His radio plays mass and weather reports. He folds his own laundry. And yet, his every word shifts millions of euros. There's a story about a mayor in Enna who complains to a colleague about budget pressures. That same month, the town receives an anonymous donation earmarked for school repairs. The money clears in a day. The mayor never complains again. Was it Provenzano? He never says, but the receipt came folded in a pizzino, delivered in a church bulletin. Do you remember the olive rosaries he used to carve? He still makes them. Now, he sends them as gifts to certain officials, never with a message. Just the rosary, wrapped in cloth, delivered by someone's cousin's cousin. It's not a threat. It's not a favor. It's a reminder. In 1995, a scandal erupts in Palermo over the mishandling of a regional development fund. Journalists trace the money to a network of consulting firms. One reporter, ambitious and stubborn, pushes further. She receives a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside is a single page torn from a religious calendar. The date circled in red. The feast day of St. Dismas. The penitent thief. She drops the story, moves to Rome, writes about fashion instead. This is Provenzano at his most efficient. He doesn't silence people. He just turns the volume down until they no longer hear themselves. By now, police know he's alive. They know he's leading. But every attempt to locate him fails. Informants refuse to speak. Wiretaps go silent. Dogs lose his scent. Even thermal drones in the mountains come back cold. One officer jokes, "It's like trying to arrest a sigh." Many people still think that Provenzano stayed hidden this long because of high-level protection. Politicians, bishops, businessmen. But others believe it was simpler than that. That his protection came from loyalty earned the old way. Bread shared, debts forgiven, favors remembered. So what do you think? Can a man stay invisible for decades just by living like the men who still owe him thanks? In one of his final Pitsini from the decade, Provenzano writes, "There are no enemies, only people who have not yet received bread." It's not kindness, it's design, because even now, every kind gesture buys silence, every envelope buys obedience, every small prayer, folded inside a loaf of bread, keeps him free another day. And so, as the 1990s come to a close, Palermo blinks under fluorescent lights and bureaucratic fog. The bombs are gone. The blood is scrubbed, but somewhere, under an olive tree, a man carves a rosary bead, listens to the rain on the roof, and folds a note that will change the future. The year is 2000. A new millennium dawns, full of glass buildings, satellites, and email accounts. Italy's youth scroll through early chat rooms. Tourists wander through Palermo, snapping photos of churches rebuilt more than destroyed. In the north, politicians toast to progress and reforms. But in the south, in the hills above Corleone, a man slices apples with a rusted knife, folds another pizzino, and sets it beneath a wooden floorboard. Bernardo Provenzano is still here, still breathing, still deciding. The world may have gone digital, but he has not. While tech giants race toward the future, Provenzano continues to operate like it's 1954. He doesn't drive, doesn't phone, doesn't touch computers. He trusts only paper, creased, coded, and silent. And yet, despite, or because of, that simplicity, he remains untraceable. Law enforcement, however, is no longer satisfied with hunting ghosts. The Italian state launches Operation Nostromo, aimed directly at the remnants of the Corleonesi. They tap phones, trace bank accounts, and interrogate the few men still willing to talk. But none of it touches Provenzano. Because here's the thing. He doesn't exist in their systems. No recent fingerprints, no confirmed sightings, no voice recordings. Even the few photos that might be him are blurred and decades old. One grainy image, captured by chance outside a funeral, shows an old man with a cane and sunglasses. Investigators debate for months whether it's him. It probably isn't. That's the mainstream historical fact. By the early 2000s, the most powerful man in the Sicilian underworld had no confirmed visual record in over 40 years. So what do you think? If a man never leaves a mark, but everything bends around him, has he disappeared or simply reached perfection? In this era, Provenzano's focus shifts even more sharply toward the institutions that outlast men. Hospitals, public tenders, land registries. He understands something his enemies don't. Violence is flashy, but paperwork never dies. He directs investments into pharmacies, not the storefronts, but the distributors. Quietly, an envelope changes hands. A permit arrives early. Suddenly, Cosa Nostra has a hand in who gets insulin in Caltanissetta. There's even a story of a shipment of wheelchairs arriving at a public hospital, each stamped with the name of a non-profit organization. The non-profit had no address, no phone number, just a bank account. Investigators later linked that account to a holding company with ties to a Provenzano associate, But by then, the wheelchairs have been used, the invoices paid, and the paper trail vanishes. Meanwhile, Provenzano's theology grows. Yes, theology. He begins referencing scripture more often in his Pitsini. Quotes from Psalms, Proverbs, even cryptic references to Cain and Abel, forgiveness, and the weight of silence. Associates report that he often prays before meetings, even if alone, and carries with him a worn pocket Bible, its spine held together by tape. One Pitsino reads, "We must be like the servants in Matthew, obedient and without lamps." Another, "Do not challenge the house of Pontius. They build the courts now. It's not mockery, it's structure." Provenzano has always been a builder. He is now building a religion of discretion. His inner circle shrinks again, now limited to 2 direct contacts, both illiterate. Neither knows where the other lives. They memorize every instruction and burn every message. One of them, when arrested years later, tells investigators, "He spoke softly, even when alone, as if the walls might report him, and yet, even in hiding, his influence continues to grow. Contracts are awarded to firms no one has heard of. Judges mysteriously delay trials. Politicians receive anonymous donations, always just under the reporting threshold, and Provenzano watches, through binoculars, through coded newspapers, through cousins who whisper and cousins who nod. Do you remember the man who left Palermo politics to open a vineyard? His label wins an award in 2001. He thanks family support in his speech. A week later, he receives an envelope with a single grape inside. No return address. He closes the vineyard the following spring. Coincidence? Palermo doesn't think so, and neither do the shepherds who still bow when Provenzano's name is mentioned. Never spoken, just hinted at. The old one. The builder. The silence. At this point, some start to doubt whether he's alive at all. Rumors swirl. He died in Spain. He's in Venezuela. He's disguised as a monk in Calabria. Some believe he underwent plastic surgery. Others claim he lives in a tunnel beneath Corleone, never seeing sunlight, eating only broth and olives. Many people still think he's just a myth, a placeholder the mafia uses to defer responsibility. So what do you think? When a man becomes too quiet to be questioned, does he die or ascend? Meanwhile, in Rome, a new generation of investigators reopens the Provenzano file. They scour old land records, analyze shopping receipts, interview pensioners who once delivered eggs. One clue: a prescription for a prostate condition filled in a village pharmacy under a false name. Another: a discarded bandage with rare DNA markers found in a farmhouse basin. It's not much, but it's something. And Provenzano knows it. He moves again. New location, same habits. He eats boiled vegetables. He carves crosses. He listens to the radio only after dark, with the volume low enough to be mistaken for wind. He trims his beard with a pocket scissor and reads psalms aloud. Slowly, a note appears on a prosecutor's desk. When Judas kissed Jesus, it wasn't to harm him. It was to identify him. That week, 2 witnesses recant, and so the machine turns on. Still, by 2003, Provenzano has been a ghost for nearly 4 decades. Entire criminal dynasties have risen and fallen in that time. Some capos have died behind bars, others in alleys. Politicians have come and gone, their names remembered only for scandals or speeches no one believed. But Bernardo? Bernardo is still out there, somewhere, unseen, uncaught, unbothered. His life has become an echo chamber of habit. Rise before dawn, heat water over fire, boil chicory leaves, read scripture, write Pitsini, burn the ones that don't pass inspection, Listen to the radio for 30 minutes. Headlines only. Then silence. In a world sprinting into Wi-Fi and surveillance satellites, Provenzano still lives by the tempo of a weathered wristwatch and a shepherd's instinct. He senses threats before they appear, predicts movements like a man reading constellations others forgot existed, but he knows the chase is narrowing. Police efforts to capture him intensify. Operation Grande Oriente is underway, a multi-agency campaign that includes satellite imaging, postal monitoring, and informant networks spanning the globe. The net tightens, and still, they find nothing. That's the mainstream historical fact of the early 2000s. Despite years of high-tech manhunts, Provenzano evaded every trap using 20th century methods: faith, fear, and folding paper. So what do you think? Is it incompetence? Or is he simply smarter than every system designed to find him? In this chapter of his life, Provenzano no longer orchestrates violence. He orchestrates continuity. He appoints successors to oversee day-to-day operations, but they don't lead. He does from afar. Each man has a role, and each role is mirrored across towns to avoid collapse. No single action depends on a single man. If someone's arrested, the gears keep turning. If someone flips, their knowledge is already obsolete. He's created redundancy through anonymity. It's not a pyramid. It's a web. His Pitsini evolve further. They include not just commands, but philosophy. Lines like, "A name is useful only once, then it becomes dangerous. If you are seen, then you are already late. It is better to lose 1,000 euros than to gain a spotlight." He quotes the gospel more frequently now, but not the fire and brimstone verses. He favors the quiet ones, the parables, the ones where Jesus kneels in the dust and writes with his finger while men demand a stoning. In Palermo, investigators find one of his old hideouts, a stone house, abandoned. Inside, 3 rosaries, a box of vitamins, and a well-thumbed Bible open to Psalm 91. No fingerprints, no clues, and yet the room feels used. A priest is called to bless it. He refuses. One associate, later caught in a sweep, tells prosecutors he's already a dead man walking, not because he's dying, but because he walks like he's already said goodbye. Indeed, Bernardo's health begins to falter. Old injuries ache. His appetite fades. He writes less frequently. Some Pitsini now bear shaky penmanship, or small smudges where his hand trembled. But even in decline, his influence grows, because his system doesn't require him to be strong. It only requires him to exist. Do you remember the boy who once told Bernardo he wanted to be a pilot? That boy is now a man, flying regional routes across Europe. One of his flight logs shows a stop in Malta that lasted 38 minutes longer than scheduled. No one questioned it. But a week later, a government official in Sicily resigns. The timing? Flawless. Coincidence or gravity? Meanwhile, the Vatican faces another series of banking scandals. Investigators stumble across offshore transactions involving construction companies with shadowy ties to southern Italy. One firm lists a Corleone post office as its mailing address. The records disappear. A reporter from Milan tries to publish a story connecting these dots. Her editor pulls the piece, citing lack of attribution. The reporter receives a package at home, a used Bible with one page bookmarked. The verse, "Render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." She never writes about the mafia again. That's the subtlety of Provenzano's late reign. He doesn't issue commands. He doesn't threaten. He reminds. In 2004, authorities receive an anonymous tip, possibly from someone within Provenzano's circle. They raid a farmhouse near Mezzohuso. It's empty, but there's warm food on the table. A jacket still drying by the fire. A mattress dented in the shape of an old man's spine. He was there. They missed him by hours. The pressure intensifies. Helicopters sweep valleys. Drones scan rooftops. Phone networks are monitored for anomalous patterns. But Provenzano never touches a phone. He still sends notes folded so tightly they leave creases in the hands that hold them. A criminologist famously says, "We are trying to catch smoke with gloves." Provenzano, for his part, stays patient. The farmhouse gets swapped for another. He writes less, but with more weight. One of his final Pitsini that year reads, "We are leaves. The tree remains. Do not fear the wind. Only forget who planted you." He sends it to a man about to testify. The man changes his mind. This is what remains of Bernardo Provenzano in the new century. No bullets, no bribes, no bravado. Just folded notes, old prayers, and a machine that hums whether he breathes or not. He has become not a man but a method, and he knows. Even methods have endings. The year is 2005. Bernardo Provenzano has now eluded capture for 42 years. Children have been born, raised and grown into detectives trying to find him. Judges have written entire careers chasing the outline of a man whose face they've never confirmed. Ministers argue in Parliament about law reform, organized crime, and corruption, while Provenzano, in a creaky stone hideout, eats boiled potatoes and listens to Vatican radio through a bent wire antenna. This is not myth. This is how ghosts live. His world is smaller than ever. A single room, one small bed, a table covered in yellowed news clippings, a single light bulb. His knees ache in the morning. His breathing has changed. Sometimes he coughs without warning and curses the sound. He is now in his 70s, but still, he leads. He no longer writes Pitsini daily, maybe once a week. They're shorter, more focused, often carrying just a phrase or two. One says, "Don't open windows when the sun is brightest." Another, "A lamb walks safer when it mimics the shepherd." No names, no verbs, just suggestions. And yet the network still obeys. In Palermo, prosecutors quietly follow financial transactions tied to an infrastructure development fund. One shell company, barely more than a fax number and a dusty office, wins a bid to provide cement to 4 towns. The documents are in order, the taxes paid. No one notices the name on the last line. A woman who once cleaned Provenzano's childhood school. Coincidence? The same week, an informant scheduled to testify falls suddenly ill. Nothing fatal, just enough to miss the hearing. He recovers, but he never returns to court. Mainstream historical note. By late 2005, prosecutors in Sicily publicly admit that Bernardo Provenzano is likely being sheltered by locals, not through payment or threats, but reverence. He is seen not as a criminal, but as a quiet steward of a certain order. Many people still think he was never captured earlier because, simply put, no one wanted him found. So, what do you think? When a community becomes your camouflage, have you disappeared or simply been absorbed? In the hills, Provenzano's health worsens. His prostate condition requires medication. His vision blurs. He begins using thicker glasses, often cracked. The radio becomes harder to hear. But he still wakes early, still folds his shirts, still writes. He carves smaller rosaries now, some with just 5 beads, miniature tokens sent to trusted men. Each one serves as a benediction or a warning. One arrives at a businessman's home in Caltanissetta. No note, just the rosary. The man cancels a press conference the next morning. He later tells friends, I forgot what I was going to say. Inside Provenzano's final known hideout, police later find dried figs, blood pressure medication, and a handwritten prayer for forgiveness tucked behind a photo of the Virgin Mary. The script is shaky, the ink faded, but the man behind it, still very much active. Do you remember the farmhouse where he left his jacket drying? That place is now empty again. But villagers still say that when the wind is just right, you can smell cloves and old leather near the chimney. They say he lit cedar wood, that he recited psalms out loud, even when alone, that he washed his hands before every meal, even if there was no one to watch. In one intercepted note from 2005, he writes, "Time belongs to no man, but silence can borrow it, and time is almost up. Authorities close in. Surveillance images from drones reveal movement between two farmhouses. A small figure, hunched, never seen leaving or arriving, just there. Always there. Dogs are sent. Paths are mapped. The final strategy begins, but still Provenzano doesn't run. Instead, he sends what many consider his last true directive. If the lamb must lie down, let him do so under the old tree, and let no shepherd be alone. His closest associate, a cousin, disappears from records the next day. A vehicle is found abandoned outside Palermo. Inside, no weapons, no fingerprints, just a bottle of rosary oil and a package of bandages. Meanwhile, Provenzano prepares for the inevitable. He begins burning his own notes, not just the drafts. He disposes of old shirts, sharpens his razors, cleans every cup. Not out of panic, but ritual, because Bernardo has never been caught. He will not be caught now. He will arrive. When police do finally reach the farmhouse where he's living, in Montagna dei Cavalli, outside Corleone, there is no chase, no sirens, no resistance. Just a man in a vest and worn trousers, seated at the kitchen table, quietly placing folded notes into a shoebox. He looks up, nods, as if to say, "You're on time," and the quiet ends. The farmhouse where Provenzano now lives, if lives is the word for what he does, sits behind a patch of overgrown fig trees, near a slope where goats wander without herders. It's not the kind of place that draws attention. And that, of course, is the point. It's 2006. The newspapers in Rome still call him the Phantom of Corleone. Talk shows toss his name between segments about elections and football. And in Palermo, a task force meets daily to decode every scrap of paper, every intercepted word, every cracked conversation on worn-out wiretaps, hoping for a clue that points toward where he is. He's right under their noses. Provenzano has lived in the same farmhouse, a short drive from Corleone, for nearly 3 years now. That's the twist. All this time, everyone thought he'd slipped abroad. Spain, Venezuela, Switzerland. But the reality? He never left the valley where he was born. He just blended in better than anyone thought possible. The room he sleeps in is no larger than a prison cell. He sleeps on a hospital cot, keeps his pills in a plastic lunchbox, and stores his documents in old shoeboxes wrapped with twine. The walls are bare. The ceiling leaks when it rains, and yet he controls an empire. Even now, even with his health declining, Provenzano continues to issue instructions through his 2 remaining couriers. They never travel together. They use bicycles when possible. They deliver folded notes hidden inside loaves of bread, folded linen, sometimes tucked under a car seat during a visit to market. The mainstream historical fact is this. From at least 2003 to 2006, investigators confirmed that Bernardo Provenzano directed mafia activities, money laundering, political corruption, business deals, from a single rustic hideout without once using a phone, computer, or vehicle. The only thing powered in that home? A cracked radio and a kettle. So what do you think? In a world where everyone broadcasts their lives, does the ultimate power belong to the one who disappears completely? He sends fewer Pitsini now, and they've grown stranger. Some read more like parables than orders. One says, "The hand that tightens the rope must also know when the tree will bend." Another reads simply, "We are all shadows of our quietest decision." People follow them anyway. In the village, no one asks questions. He has become a fixture, even if unspoken. The bakery he sends for bread never sees him. The pharmacy he uses sends someone to deliver his medication without asking for payment. It's not out of fear anymore. It's habit. That's the thing. He's folded himself so completely into the landscape that his survival has become as natural as the olive trees. To question his presence would be like questioning the stone path to the church. Cracked, weathered, but always there. Even inside the organization, there's now a split between two generations. The old guard, those shaped by Riena's bloodshed and Provenzano's stillness, follow his method, even if they disagree. But the younger men, some begin to question. They want speed, tech, control that feels more modern, and Provenzano knows this. He hears it not through microphones or screens, but through tone, through the way a pizzino is folded, through pauses in conversation, through which proverb is left out, not which one is used. There's a particular young capo in Catania who begins making waves. He purchases a Mercedes, speaks too freely in restaurants, tries to intimidate a judge's nephew. Too loud, too fast. Provenzano hears of this through a cousin. He does not reply. A week later, the man is arrested, not for murder, not for extortion, but for tax evasion. And this is the thing. Provenzano didn't need to touch him. He just loosened one knot, and the man unraveled himself. Do you remember when Bernardo said, "Silence can borrow time"? He's still borrowing. Every day he breathes is a borrowed day. But now, he begins to feel the weight of the years. His hands shake, his vision dims. Some days, he forgets the day of the week, but the system still runs. In 2006, the pressure tightens. Police begin focusing not on him, but on doctors, pharmacies, trash collectors. If Provenzano's alive, they reason, he must be consuming something. There must be pills. There must be waste. And for the first time in years, they're right. A blood pressure medication, purchased under a false name. A discarded napkin with traces of DNA. A bag of burned paper remnants, one of which contains a partial phrase. The lamb lies near the olives. It's enough. The net closes, and Provenzano, sitting at his table, spooning broth from a chipped bowl, seems to know it. He begins wearing clean clothes each morning. He writes fewer notes, and the ones he does send, they carry phrases like, "Everything borrowed must return." The wind cannot be caught, but still it moves the leaves. His last known instruction to his inner circle is not an order, but a farewell. The path continues, but my steps remain here. And with that, he waits. April 11, 2006. After 43 years in hiding, longer than most investigators have been alive, Italian police surround a weathered farmhouse in the hills near Corleone. It's quiet. There are no guards, no tripwires, no tunnel networks, just olive trees and bird song. Inside the farmhouse, an old man sits in a chair near the window. He's wearing a sweater vest and thick socks. A Bible rests on the table beside a pair of cracked glasses and a half-eaten pear. His expression is unreadable, calm, even resigned. The police knock, and Bernardo Provenzano says, simply, "I am the one you are looking for." There is no chase, no gunfire, just the soft creak of the door and the rustling of paperwork. And then the most powerful mafia leader in modern Italian history is taken into custody without so much as a raised voice. This is not a cinematic moment. There's no music swelling, no monologue. But it is, in its own quiet way, seismic. For decades, he has defied every agency, every algorithm, every whisper campaign. And yet in the end, he folds like one of his own Pitsini. Calm, controlled, deliberate. Police find a few modest possessions in the house. Religious texts, basic medication for prostate issues and hypertension, writing materials, a large stash of Pitsini, hundreds of them, some coded, others half-burned, all meticulously folded. One mainstream historical detail from the arrest: Provenzano's primary means of communication had remained unchanged since the 1970s. No computers, no phones. He was leading one of the world's most powerful criminal organizations using scraps of paper. So, what do you think? Is that old-fashioned cunning, or proof that in a world overwhelmed by information, the most powerful man was the one who left the smallest trail? As word of his arrest spreads, reactions ripple across Italy. In Rome, officials hold press conferences, calling it the end of an era. In Palermo, prosecutors quietly celebrate, but also brace for what comes next. Because even in custody, Provenzano is not done. Not yet. Inside prison, he speaks little, requests nothing. His health is fragile, and soon he's transferred to a hospital wing. Doctors note signs of stroke, memory decline, possibly Parkinson's, but he is still present, still there. When asked for comment during intake, he tells the officer, "I have lived like a man. I will die like one." The press, of course, descend like gulls. Editorials dissect his methods, his mystique, his discipline. But none can quite explain him. Because how do you define a man who refused to exist the way the world demanded? Inside the interrogation room, he sits across from prosecutors who have studied him for half their lives. They ask questions. He nods, sometimes offers vague answers. "Did you give orders to Rena?" "I don't recall." "Were you the boss of bosses?" "I was just a worker." And perhaps he means it, because Provenzano never built statues of himself. He built a system, one that obeyed silence, honored delay, and worshipped discretion. He tells one investigator, "People look for lions, but the forest is ruled by vines." His mind, once sharp as a scalpel, now drifts. Some days, he forgets where he is. Other days, he hums Sicilian lullabies under his breath, eyes half closed. A court-appointed psychologist notes in his file, "The subject displays profound emotional containment, exhibits neither remorse nor pride, only stillness." In Palermo, the power vacuum left by his arrest begins to fill. Younger mafiosi squabble, step into the light too quickly. Some are arrested within months, others disappear. The old order is cracking, not because Provenzano has fallen, but because the machine he built cannot function under scrutiny. Do you remember the rosary oil found in a cousin's car? Police trace it back to a shipment from Naples, purchased through a wellness distributor once owned by a woman from Trapani. That woman had no idea her customer was the mafia's last ghost, because this is what Provenzano understood. When you turn your empire into routine, no one notices when you leave. During his trial, the prosecution reads out a list of crimes: murders ordered, heroin trafficked, judges compromised. The courtroom listens in silence. Provenzano shows no reaction. When asked if he has anything to say, he nods, leans toward the microphone. and whispers, "God will sort what men confuse." That line, 6 words, becomes his only public statement. It is later printed in newspapers, debated in cafes, quoted by bishops. Some call it arrogant, others call it a confession. But those who knew him best, they know it's neither. It's just Bernardo. His trial proceeds. He's sentenced to multiple life terms. No surprises. He does not appeal. He does not respond. He simply accepts. But even then, there are whispers that he continues to send messages through his lawyers, that certain phrases from court documents are interpreted as coded signals. That hospital staff who change his sheets sometimes receive anonymous gifts, a basket of bread, a new pair of shoes. Many people still think Provenzano kept leading even from prison. So, what do you think? Can a man become so practiced at silence that even his stillness speaks? As 2006 comes to a close, Provenzano lies in a hospital bed under fluorescent lights. The walls are pale green. A small wooden crucifix hangs above his head. One night, a nurse hears him murmur in his sleep, "If the tree falls, the roots do not grieve, they wait." And the nurse, though unsure of the meaning, writes it down because somehow it feels important. By early 2007, Bernardo Provenzano is officially in custody, but unofficially, he still resides in the shadows. Italy's most notorious fugitive-turned-prisoner lies in a guarded hospital wing, but no one quite believes his silence has ended. Not the prosecutors, not the journalists, and certainly not the few remaining old guard mafiosi who still send cryptic inquiries through lawyers and cousins and priestly intermediaries. He's a man now shrunken by age, his cheeks hollow, his eyes milky with fatigue. He mumbles prayers sometimes. Other times, he stares at the ceiling for hours. But make no mistake, the myth of Provenzano isn't dying with his body. It's spreading. Every nod he gives, every phrase he whispers, is analyzed for meaning. One day, when asked whether he wishes to speak to the court, he replies with just one word, "Rain." That's it. Later, that week, a mid-level capo in Agrigento flees the country. Coincidence? The newspapers don't think so, and neither does the anti-mafia directorate, who label Provenzano a silent oracle, a mind that still turns levers even as his muscles fail. Mainstream historical detail. In 2007, prosecutors confirmed that even during his hospital incarceration, Provenzano communicated indirectly through carefully phrased legal memos and family visits. Nothing was ever provable, but several high-level criminal activities seemed to shift immediately after certain court appointments with his lawyers. So what do you think? Can language become so sparse, so honed, that even a pause carries instruction? His trial continues in parallel, segmented across jurisdictions. Palermo, Naples, Reggio Calabria. Each case draws from decades of testimony, files, and faded Pitsini. But nothing rattles him. In one proceeding, a judge lists 29 murders linked to Provenzano. He asks if the defendant has anything to say. Bernardo looks up, smiles faintly, and says, "History has many authors." The courtroom stills. The judge sighs. The prosecutor tightens their grip on a pen. That phrase will later be dissected in legal journals and political science classrooms. But to Provenzano, it's not provocation. It's punctuation. Meanwhile, younger members of Cosa Nostra struggle to maintain the structure Provenzano so carefully designed. The network begins to fracture under surveillance, arrests, and, most of all, lack of discipline. They want flash, speed, profit. He had insisted on slowness, invisibility, ritual. In his absence, some try to emulate his methods, writing messages by hand, refusing phones. But they lack the restraint. One young boss is caught after scribbling orders on printer paper. and forgetting to burn them. Another sets up a coded signal using church bells, unaware that police have already bugged the steeple. Provenzano hears of these failures. He does not weep. He does not rage. He folds his hands and, according to one nurse, whispers, "They inherited the tools, not the discipline." The state, meanwhile, capitalizes on his arrest to bolster public morale. Campaigns are launched, speeches made, school children write essays on the rule of law. But in private, the prosecutors know the truth. The capture of Provenzano ended an era, but it didn't dismantle the system, because the system is not a person. It is memory, and Provenzano ensured his was long and well fed. Do you remember the vineyard whose owner received a single grape in the mail? His grandson now owns a logistics firm. It wins a major contract to supply food to hospitals in Sicily. No red flags, no paper trail. But someone, somewhere, remembers who provided that land. And someone else receives a folded note with just one word: harvest. Coincidence? Or just an echo of a man too methodical to ever truly vanish? Back in the hospital, Provenzano is allowed limited contact with family. One of his sons visits. They speak briefly. No hugs, no tears. The son later tells an interviewer, "He told me to wash my hands after I leave, that was it." But the subtext is clear. Always cleanse your ties. Leave nothing lingering. Not even fingerprints of affection. That same week, a journalist uncovers documents showing links between a construction firm and a Catholic diocese. The contracts date back 20 years. The firm's original owners are gone. But the signature approving the foundation came from a priest known to have received a wooden rosary from an anonymous donor in 1991. The story is pulled from publication before it goes live. The journalist receives no threats, just a copy of the Book of Proverbs in the mail. No note, no return address. On page 13, a single verse is underlined. "A prudent man concealeth knowledge." Bernardo continues to decline. His hands tremble constantly. He struggles with speech, but his silence, paradoxically, begins to roar. Former allies, sensing the final chapter, begin quietly reaching out to prosecutors, hoping to strike deals before the system collapses. Some say they're afraid of arrest. Others say they're afraid of what happens next. A mafia without a ghost. A network without a pulse. And Provenzano, he sleeps more now. Often with his hand resting on his chest, fingers curled slightly, as if grasping something invisible. His lips move occasionally. A prayer. A memory. Or maybe, just maybe, a line of instructions no one will ever decode. One evening, a young doctor changes his IV. The room is silent. The windows open to a courtyard where birds wheel through dusk. The doctor hears him murmur, "The orchard does not mourn the farmer, it waits for spring." By 2008, the world has long since changed from the one Provenzano once ruled, now riddled with CCTV, fiber optic cables, biometric scans, and online databases cataloging everything from DNA to shopping habits. The old tricks should no longer work. And yet, here lies the man who once bent Sicily with folded paper and whispered delay, still intact, still surrounded by a myth no technology can erase. The prison wing he inhabits is sterile, windowless, and eerily quiet. He no longer receives visitors beyond medical staff and the occasional priest. He is largely nonverbal now, barely responsive most days. But even in that silence, his presence pulses. To some, he remains a symbol of discipline. To others, a warning. There's a strange reverence in the air around him. Guards speak softly near his door. One nurse keeps a small notebook of the phrases he mutters in sleep. Some biblical, some completely indecipherable. One entry reads, "All roots return to the stone where they cracked." She doesn't know what it means, but she writes it down anyway. They all do. Outside those concrete walls, remnants of Provenzano's network still linger like fog, thin, but dense enough to obscure. Several businesses quietly dissolve, others morph into new names, new logos. A company that once provided chairs to Sicilian schools suddenly becomes a shell for international seafood distribution. Not illegal, just strange. The anti-mafia task force begins tracing these changes. Some they freeze, others vanish before the paperwork even finishes printing. The message is clear. Even if the man is broken, the system has contingency. Mainstream historical fact. After Provenzano's arrest, Italian investigators discovered a vast network of companies and associations operating on long, untouched contracts, many registered to elderly Sicilians with no clear connection to the work. When questioned, some had no idea their names had ever been used. So what do you think? If a man teaches others to sign their names in fog, can anyone ever follow the ink? Within Cosa Nostra, power shifts like sand. The younger generation struggles. They talk too much, post pictures, use phones. One brags about a deal on a burner phone that wasn't as untraceable as he thought. He's arrested in a public park, holding a smoothie, a far cry from Pitsini baked into bread. Provenzano, lying on his side under fluorescent lights, says nothing. But the few remaining old guard mafiosi still speak of him with awe, not because he was ruthless, but because he lasted. He outlived the fire, one whispers during a wiretapped call, and that might be the truest thing ever said about him. There's a rumor, never confirmed, that in his final months of awareness, Provenzano asked for a specific psalm to be read aloud. Psalm 94. The one about vengeance, justice, and divine patience. The chaplain reportedly obliged. When the final line was spoken, he will bring upon them their own iniquity. Provenzano closed his eyes and nodded just once. No one speaks during his rare court appearances anymore. He's wheeled in, head lowered, face gray and slack. A shell of a man who once rearranged an entire country with messages no longer than a grocery list. And yet, even then, his bodyguards refer to him as Il Capo, the boss, because while the hands tremble, the myth does not. Do you remember the pharmacist who delivered his blood pressure medication back in 2006? She now manages a charitable foundation that distributes food across Palermo. Funded anonymously, no strings attached. When asked why she took the job, she reportedly said, "Some debts aren't on paper." That's what Provenzano understood. That's what he passed on. Many people still think that his greatest legacy isn't crime, it's form. He taught a generation of men how to speak without sound, move without motion, act without presence. And that's far harder to dismantle than a drug ring or a corrupt contractor. In late 2008, a priest who once visited him in prison publishes an anonymous memoir. In it, he describes Provenzano as a man aware of judgment, but not afraid of it. He recounts one night where Bernardo, lucid and calm, asked, "Do trees know they will fall, or do they simply keep standing until they don't?" The priest didn't answer. He didn't need to. By now, Provenzano barely eats. He receives nutrients through tubes. His days blur into a steady hum of distant voices, rolling wheels, and the drip of fluid into veins that once mapped the fate of a nation. One nurse, new, unaware of the full history, remarks that he reminds her of her grandfather. The others go quiet, because Provenzano was no grandfather. He was gravity disguised as flesh. One evening, as fog rolls in over the prison yard, an owl lands on the fence. It stays there for hours, unmoving until the sun rises. The guards joke about omens, about ghosts, but the oldest among them, who once served in Corleone, watches the bird and whispers, "He sent that, just checking the locks." By 2009, time begins to pull Bernardo Provenzano apart in slow, invisible ways. He no longer walks on his own. His body, once wiry with stubborn discipline, is frail and sagging. His eyes drift, not always focusing. His voice, when it comes, arrives in murmurs no louder than a turning page. He forgets meals, forgets names, but rarely does he forget the scriptures. The book of Psalms becomes his anchor. Nurses report that he mouths familiar verses, even in sleep. He clutches a worn Bible, its corners curled, pages thin and loose from overuse. One psalm he returns to again and again: "Be still, and know that I am God." Stillness. It's always been his way. Outside the walls, journalists tire of the myth. The headlines fade. Provenzano is old news, literally. The younger mobsters now make their way through the courts, their methods sloppy, their digital footprints lit like runways. The new mafia lacks poise, lacks patience. They live fast, flash cash, and brag before they've built anything that could last. Provenzano, if he notices, does not comment. Or perhaps he no longer cares. But then, something curious happens. A judge reviewing property seizures in western Sicily flags an anomaly. An old warehouse, listed as abandoned for years, suddenly sells, twice. Once to a shell company based in Malta, then again to a tourism firm in Venice. When traced, the paperwork leads to a Swiss holding firm originally chartered in 1992 by a retired notary from Corleone. There's no direct evidence, just patterns, familiar folds, the way the contracts were timed, the sequence of notary stamps. It feels like Provenzano, but he's lying in a hospital bed, hooked to IVs. So how? Mainstream historical fact. Even after his arrest and incapacitation, Provenzano's name surfaced indirectly in ongoing investigations. No orders were confirmed, no messages found. But the system he had built, resilient, decentralized, deeply familial, seemed to function autonomously, as if following blueprints laid years prior. So what do you think? Can a structure outlive its architect, not through memory, but through mimicry? Back in his hospital room, Provenzano grows quieter still. His sons visit occasionally. One brings cookies, another a new blanket. They speak little. Just sit. One of them later tells a reporter he wasn't waiting for death, he was waiting for confirmation. When asked what that meant, he said nothing more. The guards outside his room rotate frequently. Most find the assignment unsettling. "He doesn't do anything," one says, "but it feels like he's aware of you anyway." At night, sometimes Provenzano hums old Sicilian lullabies. Sometimes the Lord's Prayer. Once, a nurse overhears him muttering a name: Salvatore. She doesn't know if it's a prayer, a memory, or a ghost. There's talk in Palermo now of reform, new anti-mafia laws, new wiretap capabilities. But among those who know, there's a quiet admission that something is missing. The machine is exposed, yes, but not stopped. The mafia has lost its lion, but the forest still stands. Provenzano drifts in and out of lucidity. Some days he responds to his name. Other days, he doesn't. But when a chaplain mentions his baptismal date, Provenzano smiles faintly and whispers, "The water was cold. The priest had a cough." The chaplain nods, says nothing. Outside, the world continues. Economies shift. Political coalitions dissolve and reform. But Provenzano's myth, like a pressed leaf in an old book, stays intact. Do you remember the shepherd dog once used to carry his notes? It's long gone. but its bloodline continues. A breeder in central Sicily reports that several dogs from the same lineage were recently sold to unnamed buyers. One of those dogs is spotted months later outside a bakery in Trapani, tied to a post. No one claims it. But a man enters the bakery, buys bread, and leaves behind a folded scrap of paper containing only the words, "The pattern remains." Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps that's the final test, to see if the world can still hear his whisper, even without his breath. In the prison hospital, Provenzano begins refusing food. Not stubbornly, not dramatically, just gently, like a man who's finished his work and now no longer needs fuel. His doctors continue treatment. His condition remains stable but deteriorating. But those who visit him begin to speak in past tense, even while he's still breathing. His lawyer, when interviewed, says, "He has no statement. He has already said what he came to say." And what was that? Paper instead of fire, discipline instead of drama, distance instead of fame. That was Provenzano's language. That was his confession. In the weeks to follow, his contact with the outside world is cut completely. No visitors, no notes, no instructions. If there are still wheels turning, they're turning on inertia alone. But sometimes, when the wind blows just right across the hills of Corleone, you can still hear the hush in the wheat fields, the pause before a door creaks open, the sense that someone, somewhere, still knows what time it is, even if no one speaks it aloud. And maybe that's his final legacy. Not crime, not empire, but the silence that survives everything. It is now 2010. Bernardo Provenzano's world has shrunk to a single corridor, a single bed, a single breath drawn slower than the last. His body is present, yes, but it no longer seems to house the man who once orchestrated empires without leaving footprints. His skin is pale, almost translucent under the hospital lights, and his eyes, once sharp as razors, now swim like clouds over glass. He rarely speaks now. When he does, it is brief, fragmented, snippets of psalms, fractured memories. Once, he whispered, "Check the oil." The nurse didn't understand. Perhaps he didn't either, but in Palermo and in the valleys of Sicily, his name still lingers. Not on billboards, not in breaking news, but in the quiet ways, the paused sentence, the avoided topic, the long gaze over a village from a worn church step, because the man may be ending, but his methods are not. The anti-mafia task forces, now under a new generation of leadership, intensify their efforts. They focus less on Provenzano's active communication and more on the echoes, the people, paperwork, and protocols that still function in his absence. A rural cooperative is found laundering funds through agricultural subsidies. The signatures are all new. The legal structure's airtight. But the fold of the forms, the timing of the filings, the sequence of approvals, they feel familiar. They feel Provenzano. One mainstream historical note from this period. Prosecutors admitted that, even after his arrest, Cosa Nostra's financial systems showed evidence of being pre-programmed for long-term automation. Contracts, political contacts, and infrastructure bids functioning years after his last known message. So, what do you think? When a system becomes indistinguishable from nature, does it die when its designer fades, or does it simply evolve? Meanwhile, inside his hospital room, Provenzano's days blend. Nurses rotate. His eyes follow their shoes. He counts the steps, not out of habit, but because counting is the only thing that ever really anchored him. One night, as rain taps the glass in slow rhythm, He lifts a hand and forms the shape of a cross mid-air. Not dramatically, just quietly, like someone folding a note one last time. A priest visits, offers communion. Bernardo declines. The priest asks gently, "Is there anything you'd like to confess?" A pause. Then Provenzano, with barely a breath, replies, "The tree grows crooked when no one watches it. Nothing more." Elsewhere in Sicily, a bakery changes ownership. The paperwork lists a niece. The niece lives in Turin. She doesn't bake. But the business stays open, clean, and modestly profitable. The new staff use old suppliers. Some remember the deliveries during the Provenzano years. They don't question it. They just keep baking. Do you remember the marble supplier who once worked on public schools during the 1980s? His grandson is now a consultant for an energy project along the coast. He denies any involvement with organized crime. He pays his taxes. He donates to charity. But when asked about the Provenzano name, he simply says, "I don't speak of ghosts." And that's exactly what Bernardo has become, not in the metaphorical sense, not romanticized, just literal. An invisible shape that continues to occupy space long after it should be gone. One nurse leaves the hospital staff. She writes in her resignation letter, "His silence changes the room. I can't explain it. I just want to go where things don't feel unfinished." At night, Provenzano often turns his head toward the window, though there's no view. He seems to be looking at something beyond the wall. Maybe Corleone. Maybe a kitchen where his mother once made soup. Maybe nothing at all. Sometimes he whispers names. Not always people. Sometimes towns. Sometimes trees. Sometimes just one word. Wait. One morning, the guards find him asleep in an unusual position. Arms folded neatly across his chest, legs aligned. His breathing is shallow but rhythmic. A Bible lies open beside him, though no one remembers putting it there. The verse, circled in pencil, reads, "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven." They don't wake him. Instead, they let him sleep. Because even now, his rest feels deliberate, as if every breath were still a message folded inside a final envelope. And outside, the trees do not grieve. They sway. The birds do not announce his name. But they do not forget it either. The wind carries no Pitsini anymore, but it still knows how to arrive without knocking. The year turns again, 2011, then 2012, and time does what even governments and prosecutors could not. It wears Bernardo Provenzano down with neither urgency nor vengeance, just patience. He now drifts through each day like mist, half present, half silent. He eats little, sleeps often, and when awake, mostly stares at ceilings, at walls, at the trembling hands folded over thin sheets. If there's pain, he doesn't show it. If there's fear, it's buried so deep that even time has given up digging. In the sterile quiet of his prison ward, nurses begin speaking of him in the past tense. He used to whisper psalms. He would blink 3 times when you asked if he needed water. He never raised his voice, not once. But Provenzano still breathes, still exists. And the myth? That's only grown, because outside his room, Sicily whispers. Not through fear anymore, but through habit. A shipment is delayed in Palermo, and the dock manager instinctively checks the delivery slips twice. Not because anyone told him to, but because you never know who's still watching. A contractor preparing a bid for road repair steps back from the table, erases a contact from his phone. Again, no threats, just old reflexes, because Provenzano's real gift wasn't power, it was programming. He taught an entire generation to flinch at silence, to wait for confirmation that would never come, to obey systems not personalities, mainstream historical detail. Even as late as 2012, multiple organized crime operations in Italy were found to be structured on what prosecutors called autonomous inertia. Networks built to function without live leadership, still using rituals and pathways believed to be established by Provenzano decades earlier. So what do you think? Can obedience outlive the voice that first gave the command? Inside, Provenzano has become almost statuesque. He barely moves, responds to nothing. Medical staff consider him neurologically diminished. Profound cognitive decline, one report reads. But occasionally, rarely, he breaks the spell. A nurse hands him a cup of water. He blinks, turns his head, and says, "You've folded the paper wrong." That's all. The nurse doesn't understand, but she nods anyway. Somewhere in Trapani, a fishing boat quietly changes hands. The new paperwork is spotless. The buyer is a businessman from Naples. No connections on record. But the previous owner, now retired, once owned a warehouse Provenzano was believed to have used in 1984. Coincidence? Or just the last echo of an echo? And yet, in Rome, Parliament debates new laws aimed at organized crime. Data surveillance, money tracing, more tools, more speed, more transparency. But Provenzano's ghost doesn't fear surveillance. It just doesn't participate, because what he built doesn't depend on wires. It depends on pause and timing and paper folded 3 times, never 4. One day, during a routine check, a doctor asks him if he knows where he is. He replies after a long silence, "Between yesterday and the one after tomorrow," and then closes his eyes. Back in Corleone, old neighbors remember him differently. He was quiet, one says. Strange, even before he vanished. A butcher recalls seeing him once in the 1970s, buying garlic and leaving exact change. Didn't look like a boss. The butcher shrugs. But maybe that was the point. In an archive in Palermo, a young prosecutor finds a folder misfiled under land use permits. Inside, several letters written in Provenzano's neat, sloping handwriting. Dated the late 90s. None are signed. Each describes procedural delays, suggested time frames, payment limits, not threats, just recommendations. One line stands out. "If everything waits, nothing resists." The prosecutor stares at that sentence for hours, then closes the folder. Doesn't mention it in court, because sometimes even the law understands that truth does not always demand an audience. By now, Provenzano's hands have curled. His bones are soft, brittle, his skin paper thin. Nurses prop him up with care, as if he might fold like one of his notes. His breath is slow, but even. His eyes no longer track movement, but still, some say, he listens. The chaplain who visits every Thursday swears that when he reads Psalm 23, Provenzano's fingers twitch on the line. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," the chaplain doesn't finish the verse aloud. He just watches. Outside, rain gathers in slow sheets on the window glass. The world keeps turning. Phones buzz. Deals are made. Young mafiosi now post cryptic captions on social media, trying to sound like ghosts, but looking more like echoes of something they never understood. They imitate silence, but they lack stillness. And Provenzano, he just waits, like a final page that refuses to turn. By 2013, the man once called Il Fantasma di Corleone, the ghost, has truly begun to fade from view. There are no new photos of Bernardo Provenzano, no press briefings, no legal fireworks, just the steady hum of machines in a prison hospital, the shuffle of rubber soles, the whisper of nurses switching shifts. He no longer speaks, barely moves. His body lies there, thin and folded inward, like the final curl of a burning page. But the name, that name, still echoes. Outside in Palermo, a magistrate receives an anonymous envelope. No note, no return address, just a hand-drawn map of a property in Bagheria, with a red dot marked near a barn. The land is later searched. Hidden beneath loose tiles, 3 safety deposit box keys, untouched for over 20 years. Inside those boxes, documents linking shell companies across 5 countries. Nothing illegal on paper, but the trail leads back, always, to Corleone, always. And when asked who could have known about this, after so many decades, one investigator just shrugs and says, if Provenzano didn't die, he simply went quiet enough to vanish again. Mainstream historical detail. Even into the 2010s, Italian authorities continued to uncover financial structures and communication trails that matched Provenzano's methodology. Experts described it as systemic ghosting, a strategy to outlive visibility by embedding operations in institutional habits, not individuals. So what do you think? When silence becomes the default language, does sound even stand a chance? In the ward, Provenzano lies beneath crisp white sheets. There are no photos on the walls, no letters from grandchildren, no flowers, but his Bible remains, cracked, dog-eared, and always open to the same psalm. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness. No one knows if he still reads it. But the page never changes. A new nurse joins the rotation. She wasn't born when he disappeared in 1963. To her, he is just another patient, just another name on a clipboard. But after her first week, she starts walking softer in the hallway near his door. She can't explain why. He's not awake, she tells another staffer. But it feels like he's waiting. Elsewhere, a shipment of produce meant for a Sicilian supermarket is rerouted without explanation. The revised bill of lading carries a faint watermark, the silhouette of a cross. It matches the watermark once used by a now-defunct religious charity linked to a former Provenzano associate. No crime is found, no charges filed, but a local reporter calls it the quietest hand still playing the game, and quietly, others begin to reflect. An ex-judge publishes a memoir titled The Men Who Didn't Raise Their Voices. One chapter, simply titled B, recounts the fear not of violence, but of unpredictability. He didn't break people, the judge writes. He bent time. Back in Corleone, locals no longer whisper his name like a curse. Instead, it's become a kind of uneasy folklore. He was clever, one shopkeeper says. A ghost, but a sharp one. Children hear the stories and ask, did he really write notes that made people obey? And the adults respond, he didn't need to make them. He just reminded them they already knew what to do. The chaplain still visits weekly, reads aloud, even if no one listens. One day, he tries a different verse, a gentler one from Ecclesiastes. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning. When he finishes, he closes the Bible and looks at Provenzano. The man doesn't move, but a single tear leaks from his right eye, tracing the ridge of his temple like a mark left by memory. Is it pain? Is it prayer? Or perhaps just muscle? No one knows. But the nurse on duty marks it in her report. Elsewhere, a cafe owner in Messina is asked if he remembers the days when Provenzano was on the run. He smiles tightly. We were all on the run then, he says. He just ran quieter. The world continues. Palermo traffic snarls. Politicians campaign. Tourists sip espresso near fountains once washed with bribes. But in the prison hospital, no one mentions what everyone knows, that even in stillness, he remains a signal. Not a man, not anymore, but a rhythm, a shape, a lesson in what happens when silence is chosen, not imposed. By 2014, Provenzano's condition has deteriorated to the edge of life, a body more symbolic than sentient. He no longer reacts to light, speech, or the gentle pad of sponge baths done out of routine rather than expectation. His eyes stay open for hours without blinking. And yet, somehow, his presence hasn't left the room. He lies there like a relic, a breathing monument to discipline, distance, and the kind of control that asks for nothing aloud. Doctors refer to him in clinical terms now: unresponsive, vegetative, terminal cognitive decline. But staff still speak softly around him. Even the cleaning crew lowers their voices, as if raising them might disrupt something ancient and listening. A quiet joke passes between nurses. If God's keeping score, Provenzano's ledger might already be filed. But no one really laughs. The outside world, meanwhile, stumbles into a digital age that Provenzano never touched, but somehow predicted. The mafia, as it once was, is collapsing. Wiretaps are constant. Surveillance tech is faster than silence. Messages can't be written in bread anymore. Not when phones are stitched into every pocket. Young mafiosi are reckless, loud, and disposable. And still, across the island, Provenzano's style echoes. Not because it's profitable, but because it worked. Mainstream historical fact: Italian intelligence agencies confirmed that many Cosa Nostra members continued to emulate Provenzano's low-tech discipline, even years after his incapacitation, avoiding phones, limiting face-to-face meetings, and using old-fashioned religious cover to obscure logistical movements. So what do you think? If a method survives the man, is it still his? Or has it become something more? Like a liturgy. Back in the hospital, Provenzano receives visitors less and less. His family comes rarely. His lawyer checks in out of duty. The chaplain still reads, though he's switched now from psalms to parables. Simpler, gentler. Sometimes he doesn't even finish them, just trails off. And Provenzano? Nothing, still as stone. But the guards say the air still changes when the priest enters the room. It thickens. Elsewhere, the final strands of his system quietly disintegrate. A vineyard is seized by the state. Its ownership had passed through 6 layers of legal camouflage. A bank in Zurich freezes accounts with names that no longer exist. A shell company in Brazil is dissolved overnight. Its last action: wiring $4,200 to an anonymous cultural association in Naples. The last Pitsini are gone. The handlers retired, arrested, or deceased. And yet, a man in Caltanissetta receives a single envelope in the mail. No return address, no note. Just a blank sheet of white paper folded 3 times, sealed with a tiny cross of twine. He doesn't report it. He just packs a bag and leaves town. No one sees him again. Call it superstition. Call it theater. But in Sicily, ritual still beats logic, especially when that ritual belonged to a man like Provenzano. Do you remember the old construction permit signed back in 1996? The one with the coffee ring mark in the bottom corner? That permit was used, nearly 2 decades later, to authorize a boutique hotel in a town where Provenzano once attended Mass under an alias. A tourist sleeps in that room now. She opens the bedside drawer to find a Bible. Inside, a pencil underline beneath Ecclesiastes 3:7, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. She thinks it's quaint, takes a picture, posts it online. It receives 42 likes. And somewhere in the administrative offices of the Palermo archives, an intern cataloging seized documents pauses at a stack marked Religious Associations, 1985-1999. One folder is empty, but inside it, a single napkin. On it, the faint impression of an inked fingerprint. The archivist frowns, notes it, and moves on, because not all legacies are meant to be traced. Some are designed to exist as presence, like heat that lingers after the stove goes cold. In the ward, Provenzano's breath stutters now. Gaps stretch longer. Machines do more of the work. The doctors speak in hours, not days, but still, The room is kept orderly, sheets tucked with precision, Bible dusted, and every evening just before the lights dim, a nurse adjusts his pillow and whispers, "Still waiting?" She doesn't expect a reply, but she still waits 3 seconds, just in case. Because if anyone could come back from the brink, not with drama, but with deliberate stillness, it would be him. And if he does, it won't be loud, it won't be sudden. It will be folded, filed, and final. The final breath comes in July of 2016. It's unceremonious, not cinematic. Just a slow exhale after a stuttering inhale, a soft rustle of sheets as the body settles into stillness. No gasps, no last words, no thunder. The machines beep their final measure, then flatten into quiet. Bernardo Provenzano, the tractor of Corleone, the whisper that rewrote war into ritual, is dead. No family is present. No priest reads a final psalm. The doctor on duty checks the time, notes it. 3:20 a.m. Outside, the wind brushes against the security fence, whistling as if to carry the message up into the hills. The headlines the next morning are brief. Bernardo Provenzano Diaz at 83. One reads, another. End of an era. But even journalists seem unsure how to write about someone who stopped being visible years ago. There's no fanfare, no large funeral. The body is returned to Corleone, his birthplace, under heavy guard. Protesters gather, so do quiet mourners. The press snaps photos of the hearse, but not many of the attendees. Because most don't attend. They watch from windows, from alley corners, from silence. He is buried in a modest family plot. The stone is plain, just his name, birth, and death. No epitaph. But in a bakery 3 blocks away, a man writes Bernardo on the side of a delivery crate and then scratches it out. No one asks why. Mainstream historical fact. After his death, the Italian press and anti-mafia investigators reflected on Provenzano's ability to evade justice for over 4 decades using only handwritten notes and a complex support network rooted in trust, silence, and routine. His legacy was not in firepower, but infrastructure, mental, social, spiritual. So what do you think? When a man dies, but his fingerprints remain on how fear is organized, did he really leave? In the years following his death, Sicily does not erupt. It contracts, becomes quieter. The mafia adapts, splinters further. A few arrests are made, a few disappearances, but something fundamental has changed, because Provenzano did not just lead men, he trained habits. Somewhere in Trapani, a man burns an old shoebox filled with folded notes. One falls out into the street. A child picks it up and sees just 3 words. Wait, then act. No one can trace the handwriting, but those who know, know. Elsewhere, a reporter writes a retrospective titled The Softest Tyrant. She describes Provenzano's methods as monastic, noting how he ruled not through charisma, but inevitability. He did not raise his hand, she writes. He lowered expectations. Back in Corleone, the locals don't say his name often. But when a contract closes too cleanly, or a government permit slides through too fast, they share a look, not fear, just memory. Could be one of his, someone says. Maybe, maybe not. The legend has begun to calcify, no longer fresh, no longer dangerous, but still present, still folded into the rhythm of Sicilian dusk, still echoed in every corridor where footsteps hesitate just before the door. The room where he died is now used for storage, but nurses still pause outside it, keys ready, before stepping in. Not because they believe in ghosts, but because some silences still deserve reverence. In Palermo's court archives, a new magistrate reviews old Pitsini. Some are faded, some illegible, but one remains clear, written in a firm, deliberate hand. He who moves first exposes himself. It is unsigned, but everyone knows. Everyone still knows. And now, dear listener, the story rests. We've walked together through folded notes and hills of Corleone, through whispers passed in bakeries and eyes that spoke more than voices ever dared, through a life built not on spectacle, but on delay, discretion, and devastating precision. Bernardo Provenzano was not the loudest man in the room. He was the pause before someone else spoke. The space between choices, the shape of control without confrontation. In that way, he didn't just rewrite how the mafia functioned. He rewired the very idea of power. But tonight, all of that can quiet down. Let your thoughts slow to match his rhythm. No urgency, no judgment, just the gentle unraveling of hours into stillness. Imagine the Sicilian countryside, its olive groves bathed in moonlight, wheat fields nodding gently under the breeze. Somewhere, a church bell rings, soft, distant, unhurried. The world turns again and again and again. And Provenzano, he sleeps now. Not in hiding, not in shadow, but beneath stone, beneath silence, beneath the stories we fold and refold like well-worn notes pass between memory and myth. So if you find yourself holding on to a decision, a worry, a restless moment, just remember, sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is to wait, to breathe, to let time do what it does best. Now close your eyes, let the weight fall from your chest, and know that even in the darkest corners, peace waits, folded, quiet, and already on its way.